Okay, well, welcome everybody, both here in the, I don't know if you call it the main group, but also the visitors that are joining us from the public. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Board of Directors of Vallecitos Water District on Wednesday, May 19th, 2021 at 5 p.m. And we're meeting via video conference as we have been now for a very long time. I'm going to read a quick notice to the public. Due to the evolving situation with COVID-19 novel coronavirus, so long as state or local public health officials have imposed or recommended social distancing measures, Vallecitos Water District will hold future meetings via teleconferencing and allow members of the public to observe and address the meeting telephonically or otherwise electronically. During this period of time, Vallecitos Water District will not be making any physical location available for members of the public to observe the meeting and offer public comment. The public is encouraged to watch and participate in the meeting from the safety of their homes. The meeting can be viewed on the agenda page located on the main page of the district's website. I lost my spot here. Public comments or questions can be submitted to the following email address, publiccomment@vwd.org. All written comments that are received at least 90 minutes before the meeting will be provided to the board, and a public record of the receipt of comment will be noted during the meeting. Members of the public viewing the meeting via Zoom video conferencing platform can express their desire to provide input at the appropriate time by utilizing the raised hand function. Additional instructions for online participation will be posted on the district's website at www.vwd.org/meetings. Okay, so we'll go ahead and call us to order. Director Boyd Hodgson.
Here.
Director Pennick.
Here.
Director Hernandez.
Here.
Director Elitharp.
Here.
And I'm here as well. Director Elitharp, would you be so kind to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight?
Absolutely. Ready, begin. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Okay, and I always get messed up on this because it says call to order before the pledge. So we've already done our roll call. Glenn, we good? We don't need to do it again, do we?
No, we're good.
Okay, and before we adopt the agenda, or I entertain a motion to adopt the agenda tonight, I just want to note on the consent calendar that that item 1.5 is going to be removed or pulled, and it will come back at a later date. Minus 1.5, is there a motion to approve tonight's consent calendar? Or I'm sorry, is there a motion to approve tonight or adopt the agenda for tonight?
Hernandez, move to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Hernandez to adopt the agenda of the regular meeting for tonight, and a second by Director Boyd Hodgson. We'll conduct a roll call vote. Director Elitharp?
Yes.
Director Hernandez?
Yes.
Director Pennock?
Yes.
Director Boyd Hodgson?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, we are at the public comment portion of our agenda. Is there any members of the public, Glenn, that are indicating that they want to speak?
Yeah, we did not receive any emails to the public comment web address. And I see that Gail Martin from the public did just raise her hand.
Okay, we will recognize Gail Martin at this time.
Go ahead, Ms. Martin.
Hey, Glenn, I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear her.
Yeah, Ms. Martin, can you hear us? Yeah, I can't.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear
Yes.
you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
We can all hear you.
I can't hear you.
That's strange.
Yeah.
We haven't had that issue before.
No, we,
As long as you can hear me, I'll go ahead and say my piece. But I'm very concerned that I now can no longer hear any of the meeting.
Can you,
Here goes. Hello, board members. Thank you for the draft budget and the CalPERS policy you've added to today's agenda. I very much appreciate it. I'm very glad you're pursuing debt issuance. Please approve staff's recommendation. I'd like to see a new master plan study added to this current budget you're working on, as there's not a new master plan study listed anywhere in the entire 10-year CIP budget. Regarding transparency, I'm concerned as the June 30th, 2020 audited financial statements you just posted several weeks ago do not show the developer fund deficit. You've listed this every prior year. It was listed under commitments and contingencies. You're not committed to paying back the ratepayers for more than 15 million you borrowed from us to pay for developer obligations. This doesn't seem transparent. I'm very concerned. I'd like to add to the next agenda the following 2 items, please. Revise the reserve policy. Add a buy-in component to the developer capital facility fees. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Martin. I hope that you can hear us, at least hear the rest of the meeting. We did hear your comments, though.
and President Sanella, we do have another member of the public who has raised their hand,
Okay,
and it's Heather Conklin, I believe. So
welcome, Heather.
I think her hand just went down. So
Yes, hi. Can you
Okay.
all hear me?
we can hear
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, hello. My name's Heather Conklin, and actually I'm an Oceanside local. But I wanted to just take a moment to introduce myself. I am actually running for the Special District Representative alternate position on San Diego Local Agency Formation Commission, which y'all know as LAFCO. And so I just wanted to take a moment to share a little bit about why I'm running and why I would like this position, why I think I would be able to be the best voice for special districts in this position. So if it is okay and pleases the board, if I might have a moment just to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, welcome, Heather. You sure can, but we do ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes.
3 minutes, absolutely. So I'm actually running for the Special District Representative alternate position, really to bring a fresh perspective to San Diego LAFCO to support policymaking that's informed and thoughtful and really balances the diverse needs of the public served by special districts like Vallecitos. And I recognize that the decisions that are made by the commission are often permanent. They impact the long-term delivery, the cost effectiveness, and the accessibility of critical services like water to the people who really need those services. So now more than ever, the unique functions of special districts, as you know, are essential for maintaining the health, the safety, and the well-being of the public. So I bring a broad background in public policy, communications, and research to my role in public service. I currently serve as the director for Mission Resource Conservation District up here in North County. And I have a deep understanding of the key roles that special districts play in addressing critical issues that impact our region, including water conservation, natural resource conservation, fire mitigation, and agriculture, as resource conservation districts serve as a nexus for addressing such issues. I've also served as a district director with the California State Assembly, where I've worked collaboratively with local and state and federal leaders on legislation and projects that's focused on transportation issues, as well as addressing climate change in the region, as well as statewide. And finally, I bring experience and research across various policy topics, including water conservation, agriculture, and sustainable development, which really gives me a deeper understanding of key local issues. So, as you know, LAFCO plays a significant role in shaping how San Diego County as a whole, as well as individual special districts, address the challenges of climate change and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. So my priorities are to promote a sustainable, economically thriving, and equitable region, including making sure that the needs of special districts are heard in the Commission's policymaking process. Representation matters. So consideration of special districts is essential in San Diego LAFCO's decision-making processes. And as you know, special districts were created to meet the specific needs of their community, which brings me to my second priority. I recognize this and will fight for local control to support cost-effective, efficient, high-quality, and accessible services to benefit the public. And my third priority is to make sure that the unique needs of North County in urban water management, conservation, and land use planning decisions are considered. LAFCO needs to have a strong voice to represent and advocate for North County to ensure that we get our fair share. I'm that voice. So my priorities reflect my commitment to North County for over 12 years. I have the experience, the education, and demonstrated leadership to provide forward-thinking leadership on San Diego LAFCO to support the important roles that special districts play in delivering critical and cost-effective services to our communities. So I respectfully ask for your vote to be your special district representative alternate on San Diego LAFCO. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I have a question for you. When is the vote?
So you should have received, I think they sent out the information last week, and the final day to submit your ballot is, I think, July 2nd. So the period of voting is open at this point.
Okay, I don't think I've received. I don't know if my colleagues have, but I don't think I've received anything yet. Is that vote? Or I don't know if it was a vote or if it's like a candidates forum. Are you going to be speaking at the CSDA meeting coming up?
Yes, tomorrow.
Okay, great. Okay, well then we'll see you there as well.
Wonderful.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Any other speakers, Glenn, that are indicated an interest in speaking?
No, sir.
Okay, great. Then let's go ahead and check that off. My next on my agenda is a presentation from BB&K.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. I'll kick this off. So at a previous board meeting, a request was made to place an item on a future agenda to discuss possible funding opportunities. This item is in response to that request. As the board knows, there are many programs being developed to provide funding in various areas. Some are specific to the direct impacts of COVID, like to pay for personal protective equipment, temperature kiosks, things like that. Some are related to the economic impacts created by COVID, like utility bill balances, late charges, things like that. And some programs are geared towards providing funding for agencies in water and wastewater sectors, which may benefit Vallecitos. And some are more like stimulus type programs. And these programs are at all levels. There's federal, state, local programs coming around. And with us tonight is Anna Schwab. And Anna is the Director of Government Affairs with Best and Krieger. And Ms. Schwab will provide us with an overview of available federal programs and funding. So Anna, if you want to take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Glenn. And good evening, directors. It's wonderful to see you all. And I actually made just a very short presentation here, so I will share my screen. There we go. And all right. Can everyone see the presentation up?
Yes.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So as Glenn shared, there are a lot of opportunities. And the biggest question is, well, how do we get that money? How does it come to our district? How does it help us? And we see it in the news a lot. We hear about it at other meetings, but the actuality of how do the funds come to the district can kind of seem elusive at times. And that's where I come in and try to help navigate and at least translate, if you would, some of the DC moves that they're making for you all. So I just wanted to give a brief overview. This is the primary slide I wanted us to talk about. We have January started a new Congress. It started a new administration. And that's a lot of different things that are happening. The administration came in with its own priorities. We saw COVID relief continuing. Tax and economic changes are going to continue as we've seen before. Infrastructure, what is the makeup of Congress, and earmarks. So I want to touch on each of these very briefly. And forgive me, I'm going to give a very high level into most of these because I don't want to take up too much of your time. Please know I'm happy to dive into any of this further should any of you have questions or like to discuss it in more detail. So I want to start with COVID relief. As Glenn had shared, there is wrong way. There we go. As Glenn had shared, there's a lot of different steps that have been taken for COVID relief. Starting back last March, we saw the CARES Act, we saw Families First, and now we saw a bill in December, and we just saw the large American Rescue Plan Act. And it's been interesting because for the most part, in terms of lost revenues and everything, we haven't seen a direct assistance on the COVID side for special districts. However, we did see a couple things that were really key. And how do they affect you? One is, as Glenn mentioned, the low income. Chairwoman Grace Napolitano and others spearheaded an effort to expand a program in Health and Human Services that focuses on low income utility support to include water and wastewater. And what a lot of special districts are now doing is partnering with local community organizations such as United Way and others to help administer that. It comes from the state, and then being able to identify who in your district needs it is where the partnership comes in. There are some regulations that we were working on with HHS to ensure that the onus of this burden didn't land on the districts. That was really important. We wanted to help the customers, but not feel invasive to the customers either. We do also have, from the most recent COVID package, the ability of the cities in which you serve to transfer funds to special districts. And your cities can also spend money on water and wastewater infrastructure. And that transfer of funds is a unique step because that wasn't in previous packages. And it would allow any of your cities to send you funds as a transfer for COVID related mitigation or other purposes. If you'd like more specifics on that, I'm happy to pull that. Popping over to the left side where we discussed the return of earmarks. It's true, there was a return. It is a small portion of the budget that has been presented. It's 1% of the discretionary funding. And the Senate is just getting their process going. The House has been underway for about a month now, and we should be seeing from the House which projects they chose. Each member was allowed to put forward 10 projects, but the committees will be further scrutinizing each one as they get forward. The interesting thing here is while a project may or may not have been put forward by the district at this time, seeing how the project funding continues and is administered will be key for going for FY23 funding. If there is a congressionally directed spending project the district would want to pursue. And that takes us right below there to the composition of Congress. You have a very unique makeup where neither chamber sees an outright majority of either party. So while we sit, in perspective, we'd like to be seeing a lot of bipartisan work. They are still able to do some things without bipartisan support, but they are really needing that. And that gets us some really, really good pieces of legislation because they're not able to just run with one party. They do need to work with the Republicans, and Republicans, likewise, in order to get some of their priorities through, need to be working with the Democrats. So it's a really unique composition as we see it come forward. That takes us down to the bottom on our infrastructure. We heard from the last administration, infrastructure, and we got some small pieces. This administration is looking to put forward a plan, and Speaker Pelosi wants to support the president. She has said she would like to see a package put forward by July 4th. We have not seen those details yet. However, what I will share is on the water and wastewater side, we did see the Senate put forward and pass their SRF reauthorization bill that contained a number of other water and wastewater funding. The unique thing here is we were able to secure some amendments that allow for more opportunity to apply for funds, a bit more flexibility, more funding provided, and increases in these accounts. That's really important because that's the first step to any infrastructure plan, is making sure water is not forgotten. I always like to say, if they're going to dig up the roads, can we please work on what's below them too? Because often we get forgotten. Coming back around to the right on tax and economic changes, we know that COVID has hit the economy in a variety of different ways and has, both on, in our backyards and on a larger scale. And on the tax side as well, we know that this administration and this Congress want to make some changes to the tax code that the Republicans had made in 2017. One of those measures that's being pursued by many members, including those from California, is the reinstatement of SALT, which many districts utilize as funding and could benefit. And it's something that we can work with Congressman Issa and others to pursue if that's something we want to make sure he knows it's important to the district. And coming up to the top, I'm going to actually go to the next slide for this, if I can. There we go. This administration came in with some very clear priorities. And whenever we're doing grant applications, we want to make sure that we're focusing on some of these things and understanding how they fit in, if they fit in at all. Environmental justice, how are we focusing on that? Are we talking about it? Is there an area? And if there's not, is there something we can do to highlight it for the administration as to where or why not? PFAS and other contaminants. We know EPA is coming out with some regulations on this. And we also know that Congress really wants action on PFAS. And it's a real concern that we want to make sure that water districts don't bear the burden of this solely. And so it's been a very unique balance of how do we thread that needle with everyone, because we want our water clean. It's the financial burden of cleaning it up we are concerned about, especially with citizen suits and those opportunities. And the important thing there in these, and I can go through each of these, we've talked a bit about most of them already, but what's important about PFAS and these other ones is each of these come with funding opportunities. And as we get through them, as we talk about, okay, we have some PFAS remediation, or we need to do, some pipeline replacements. We need to expand out. We need to, we can look at the entire 2021 project list and talk about each different pot. And then the best thing is, how do we use different ones for different measures? Because there's usually something that we can work in to identify and fit. This is just an overview of the president's infrastructure plan. It's just the important thing in this, and I'm not going to read each box for you, but the main thing I wanted to share with you for this is the president knows water needs to be a priority. And so with this will come funding opportunities in addition to the regular funding opportunities we see from different programs. These are just a list of some of the other outstanding issues that we are going to be seeing how the administration takes step from the last administration. Again, some of these come with price tags that are going to fall on us that we either have to take care of, or they're going to come with opportunities for additional funds. Either time, there's going to be a way for us to work with the administration and with Congress to identify which pots of money we can be utilizing to support our communities together. And this, I'm happy to send this around for you all. This is just an overview of the funding process. So we are in the May in appropriations right now. So the House and Senate are putting together their bills as to their appropriation bills. It does need to be done by September 30th. We've been dealing with a lot of continuing resolutions. And so we'll see how they get there. But you'll see in the middle of the summer, we do have Title 16 and WIFIA. Those are two major Western water programs that we can use in California to get funds. And they're expiring. And so we're working with Congress to try to get those not only reauthorized, but also funded at higher levels. And I think I will pause it there and just ask if there are any questions.
All right, thank you, Anna. Are there any questions from my colleagues? Oh, Director Boyd Hodgson.
Thank you, Anna. That was a great presentation. I appreciate it. I also recognize the Thomas Jefferson statue behind you. I have the exact same one. So I do have a question. You mentioned that there's money available from cities. And so, San Marcos has about 100,000 people in it. We have a city government. One of the things that came up in just this week when I was with a constituency group is, the lack of communication and lack of sort of coordination between the city of San Marcos and the water district. And that's something that I've been sort of behind the scenes working on trying to improve that. But to me, having money available from the city seems like somebody needs to be talking about that at the city and at the water district. So is that assumption correct? And then I will ask my board colleagues, I think it's time to talk about, having some kind of liaison or committee or ad hoc committee or something to improve that communication.
So I think you're absolutely correct that happens by that communication that you all have with your city counterparts. The one, I guess, big caveat I'll put in is the funding is available. A lot of cities are finding they need it due to lost revenues and other major economic hits in the cities. And the funding does allow them to really help constituencies directly and quickly. And so they may be wanting to do that. So that, I would have that conversation though. I think it would be a missed opportunity not to, because those funds are there. And again, they may need it for other reasons, but you don't know unless you ask, right? It's one of those opportunities.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
If you don't mind, I just wanted to share, just over really largely on the COVID funding, we see that we don't know that they're really done with this. There's a lot of money and we know that it can come down to you all. And so if we can help you navigate that at all, or understanding them and how helping you have the tools to know how to go to the city, with what information, we're happy to, connect you with those details.
Thanks, Anna. So how do we go about, is that a matter of having somebody from our staff reach out to you and start that discussion? I think if there's federal funds that could be used in Vallecitos in just about any way, I would be surprised if anybody was against that. So, what are the next steps? What would you recommend?
So I would recommend I can follow up with Glenn and he and I can connect on identifying exactly which first steps you all want to take and what's going to be best for your district based on your priorities, with COVID funds, with additional other opportunities that are out there. And I can connect with Glenn on that to make sure it's advancing your priorities as a district.
Yeah, Anna and I met along with Mr. Gilpin and another member of their firm, I think last week, trying to coordinate for this. Yeah, and we'll keep up the coordination. I would say though, some of the federal programs would require a match. Some are peer grants and they would help cover costs incurred. Some may be for infrastructure projects that may require the district to pick up as much as 75% of the project. So it's not always free money. Sometimes there's a match. So when we come back, we'll try to explain which category they're in. And obviously, if there's truly free money out there that we can get to offset the impacts of COVID or to build improved projects, we'll do that. But the other ones may take more strategic planning to figure out, do we have the money to match the federal or state funds available?
And if you all would like, I'm sorry, Jim, please go ahead.
No, I was just also going to mention in our conversations with Glenn, you all know the governor passed the roar back budget last week, which has about $1.3 billion for funding water and wastewater projects. So in addition to Anna, we have a local California lobbyist. So, I mean, as part of the strategy in talking with Glenn, we've incorporated that because there is a lot of that money at the state level because of the budget situation.
Mm-hmm. And that's absolutely right. And the one thing I was going to add as well to what Jim and Glenn just shared is I will follow up with Glenn and Jim and our team here, and we will put together for you all a chart of sorts so you can know some of the main areas where funding comes from and what the federal options are, plus if there's a local match attached, what those look like.
Great. Well, thank you. And thanks, Anna. Great presentation. If there's no other comments, we'll go ahead and move on. Okay, thanks again.
Thank you all very much.
Yep. Okay, I'll get caught up here. Okay, now we're on the consent calendar. And as we had already removed item 1.5 from the consent calendar when we approved or adopted the agenda for this evening. I'll go ahead and entertain a motion to approve tonight's consent calendar minus item 1.5.
Move to approve, Hernandez.
Thank you, Director Hernandez. Is there a second?
Second, Pennick.
Okay, we have a motion to approve tonight's consent calendar by Director Hernandez and a second by Director Pennick. I'll go ahead and conduct a roll call vote. Director Pennick.
Yes.
Director Hernandez.
Yes.
Director Boyd Hodgson.
Yes.
Director Elithart.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Motion passes unanimously. Okay. Super. Moving on to action items. Item 2.1, change order number 2 for the San Marcos Interceptor Project, Phase 2. Glenn, you want to kick that off, or are you going to turn that over to engineering?
Yeah, I'll kick it off briefly. So as the board knows, the district is in the middle of a construction project to upgrade the San Marcos Sewer Interceptor. And the item before the board tonight is the approval of a change order associated with that project. And Capital Facilities Senior Engineer Ryan Morgan will make the staff presentation tonight. Take it away, Ryan.
Thank you, General Manager Prom, and good evening, directors of the Vallecitos board. It's my pleasure to introduce this item tonight for the San Marcos Interceptor Phase 2 project. Directors are familiar with this project now approaching completion within the next couple months. This project, Phase 2, represents the final phase of the over 12,000 foot sewer improvement project, the Interceptor, which stretches from Twin Oaks Valley Road to Pacific Street. This is the final 3,400 feet, 42-inch diameter trunk sewer going through the city. That provides some background. As for the item tonight, just a little history on the job, which was approved by the Board of Directors on June 17th, 2020, for the contract amount of $6.3 million to TC Construction. Over the first phase, of course, of work, primarily on Tamarisk Lane and San Marcos Boulevard, crews experienced unforeseen utility conflicts in the field through potholing and identifying those conflicts. The conflicts were of such magnitude that it actually required a redesign of the sewer line alignment and also the tunnel alignment, which undercrosses the existing concrete box culvert at Pacific Street, which is the downstream tie-in location for the project. The changes and delays associated with this redesign and work associated with that totaled, well, change order 1 was received by staff in the amount of $310,000 in December of 2020. After review of the content and qualifications of the proposed work, staff agreed to a change order 1 amount of $259,654 on January 14th, 2021. This totaled 4.1% of the original contract value. Per Ordinance 146, the project budget is allocated a 5% contingency. So the remaining contingency available to the project after change order 1 totaled just over $55,000. Any change above this amount would require board authorization, which is why I'm bringing change order 2 to you tonight. So that first phase of the change work on San Marcos Boulevard and some work on Tamarisk Lane represented that first phase. The second phase, between the months of January 2021 and April, crews experienced difficulties in installing the sewer at the updated alignment location, avoiding those underground utility conflicts. Specifically, offsetting the alignment towards the curb line in South San Marcos Boulevard resulted in what we believe was discovering the subgrade underneath the pavement in San Marcos Boulevard, we believe we found the seam essentially, or the joint, where the roadway expansion at the city improvements happened in the past, when San Marcos Boulevard got widened. And the reason we believe that is because when work was going through San Marcos Boulevard, all the way from Pacific Street to Tamarisk Lane, um, we observed this crack, which you can see on board packet page 55 in the figure 1 illustration.
Hey, Ryan, would you
seeing-
like me to share that?
Oh yeah, I can actually share it if you like. Sorry.
I got it
about
up
that.
right now. I got
Ryan, your video image is really choppy on my end. It may be better if James does it.
Yeah, let me share it right now. Hey, can everybody see the pictures here?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that, Ryan. Go ahead.
No, no problem. Thank you. The sewer trench is plated with a steel plate on the right, and that's the trench. That's the limits of the contract work essentially. Due to the poor conditions of the subgrade, including groundwater, we had a real problem with sloughing of the trench wall, where we would get a collapse 3-4 feet offset at times of where we should be, resulting in additional excavation, additional backfill, and additional surface restoration in the form of subgrade and paving on San Marcos Boulevard. This work, we believe, was not impacted as a result of the means and methods of the contractor. It was, we believe it to be a condition of the subgrade in the ground, which would have surfaced across various means and methods. And the reason we believe that is because the contractor actually attempted various means and methods to mitigate this problem during construction, and was inspected every day. And based on what we observed, this was a unforeseen field condition, and district staff initiated a district initiated change order to essentially restore this additional amount of pavement on San Marcos Boulevard. And there were also additional cut-in valves that were required on the project for safety reasons, which we performed during construction. It wasn't really planned out in design. That resulted in some extra restoration needs. We negotiated with the city to actually adopt some areas of San Marcos Boulevard that were in poor condition. And those negotiations resulted in us taking in a little more work, but our goal is to provide a condition of the roadway that is to the standards of the public, which they would like to see restored. So we felt it was the proper call, and all of this coming together with all the additional paving and excavation and backfill required as part of this change order number 2, it results in an additional amount of $87,719. Staff received this proposed change order 2 in May, and we reviewed it for completeness for the additional materials and labor proposed as part of the additional work on San Marcos Boulevard. It had exceeded its bid value, and change order 2 totals 1.4% of the original contract value, which combined with change order number 1 exceeds that 5% budgetary contingency per ordinance 146. In total, 1 and 2, change order 1 and 2 combined for 5.5% of the original contract value. Staff does expect it's likely to still have one final closing change order 3 in the future. We can probably expect that in the beginning of the next fiscal year. This project is identified in the fiscal year 20 and 21 budget at $8.5 million. And funding sources are divided 29% from sewer replacement and 71% from sewer capacity funds. We are still within budget. We're still tracking within budget. We don't expect this change order to push us over budget at this point. Change order 2 is listed at $87,719. And we expect to finish, as you'll see in the fiscal impact on page 56 of your board packet, a small surplus in the range of about $5,000. Staff did take this to the Engineering and Equipment Committee, and recommends that the Board of Directors, staff recommends with support of the Engineering and Equipment Committee, recommends the Board of Directors authorize change order number 2 in the amount of $87,719, subject to the contract for the San Marcos Interceptor Phase 2 project. If there are any questions, I can field those at this time.
Thank you, Ryan. Any questions from my colleagues? I did have not a question because more of a comment, but I wanted to first say that, I know that there was a lot of challenges with this project, Ryan. Thank you for giving a comprehensive update yesterday to the Lake San Marcos Kiwanis Club. And I had the opportunity to see that presentation that you gave and learned a lot about some of the challenges with groundwater and other things that you guys came across when you were working on the project. My only question I have is that obviously there was a lot of work performed on San Marcos Boulevard, and the road is still pretty beat up after the project and bumpy. What's the plan to put that road into the same or better condition than it was when we began?
What you're seeing on the road, well, first of all, thank you for the compliment. It was an engaging group and conversation yesterday at the meeting, so it was really enjoyable on our end. The paving you see today is not final. Final paving is yet to occur. We actually have to have the road in that condition you see today for about 2 weeks for the City of San Marcos roadway standards. And then we will come in and do a final paving and seal coat operation and striping. There'll be some traffic loops that we replace as part of that. And the big one is the pavers through a bit of a wrench at us in construction because the revised alignment actually took out more of those pavers you see at Pacific Street and San Marcos Boulevard. And all of those pavers had to be reinstalled, which is not as simple as asphalt. So the final paving, final restoration is still yet to occur, but it should happen in the next week or so, week or two. I can give you a better date than that. I can follow up with you.
Yeah, when either Glenn or Ryan, or when you have a more firm date, if you could just maybe email it to the board. I'm sure I'm not the only one that gets questions about San Marcos Boulevard being one of the main roadways in town. So I'm sure others are getting the same kind of questions.
Yeah, and President Sanella, we're working closely with the city. Obviously, they control the streets, and one of the concerns they expressed is the impacts to traffic, because this is going to be a pretty extensive permanent repair, curb to curb, lane closures and all that. And they have expressed an interest that they may want us to wait until the high school is done for the year, because that's obviously a big traffic load out there. But we'll continue to coordinate with the city and get it done as soon as possible, as long as the city's okay with the pace of the project.
Okay, well, that would make sense. I think the high school is going to be done here in a few weeks. My daughter reminded me every day that summer's coming. So, and I do know that I've heard some feedback too with the city's project they have going on in San Elio Hills that perhaps it might have been better to hold off until school was out as well. So we're kind of hearing that throughout the city. Feedback is a gift. Okay, any other comments?
One quick comment.
Yep.
I guess two. Thank you, Ryan. Good presentation. One, is this a contractor we've had good experience with in the past? We've used in the past?
It is. It is a contractor the district has worked with in the past, and they are well known in the industry of underground pipeline infrastructure.
Okay.
They are a good contractor.
Okay, no, we've used them, so okay. My second, I know those pavers, I know those can cause paint. I mean, do we have to put those, is there an option to either just replace with a different method, or has anybody broached that topic?
In certain cases, the city will allow us to put paving back, asphalt pavement back. In this case, it was not enough pavers. We didn't take out enough to really, we're kind of right in the middle where at the end of the day, we just decided to keep with the contract paver replacement, and the city didn't want us to put asphalt back in this circumstance.
Yeah, and it's usually the city that drives that out, Director Pennick. We're there under an easement, so it's their roadway. So If we do something that damages it, they kind of dictate what it looks like when it's fully restored.
Gotcha. I know
One
it's gonna be
other,
a pain.
one other piece of information with that is, unless they changed it recently, that it used to require a city council action to not put the pavers in. They have I don't know if it's an ordinance or a policy. I remember staff mentioned that to me years ago when we did a road work in Twin Oaks. So
Hey, Glenn, it might be worth a call to the city, because I do recall a couple of years ago when we had that large water main break at San Marcos Boulevard in Rancho Santa Fe, and there were pavers at that time at that intersection. And I seem to recall, it's been a couple of years, so double check this for me, but I seem to recall that when it came time to repave that road, the city asked us not to put the pavers in because one, they're very expensive, and they're not really, I guess, designed to handle 50,000 cars a day driving over them, or
Exactly.
something along those lines, give or take. And so there might be an opportunity not to put them in if the city doesn't want to maintain them any longer, or just it's worth a phone call, right?
Yeah, I'll reach out to the city, and you're right. I mean, I think their position on the pavers is changing over time. They realize that they're kind of a pain. They're not as smooth as an asphalt surface, but they're trying to retain some of the original character of the roadway too. So, but we always look to them. What do you want back there? We certainly may cite our preference because it's a lot cheaper just to put down asphalt than to try to put down the pavers. But at the end of the day, it's their decision. But I'll reach out to the city manager and we'll talk about it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, if any other comments or questions? Okay, and if there's no longer just any other discussion, then we'll go ahead and entertain a motion on item 2.1.
Motion to approve. Go ahead.
I'll second you, Director Elithar.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be happy to move staff's recommendation. We heard this item from Ryan at the Engineering Equipment Committee on May 10th and did a great job then and a great job tonight. So thanks, Ryan. And I'm happy to move staff's recommendation.
Okay, and I heard a second from Director Pinnock.
I can second that, yes.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve item 2.1 as presented by staff by Director Elithar and a second by Director Pinnock. We'll do a roll call vote. Director Hernandez.
Yes.
Director Boyd Hodgson.
Yes, and congratulations on the great video that was shown.
Director Elithar.
Yes.
And Director Pinnock.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Ryan. Okay, moving on to item 2.2, the adoption of a resolution to approve Encina wastewater fiscal year 2022 operating and capital improvement budget.
Yeah, and
are we going to get a presentation this year again?
We will. I'm going to kick it off, and then I'm going to turn it over to Scott McClellan from Encina. So
Okay.
as the board knows, Vallecitos is one of 6 member agencies of the Encina Joint Powers Authority, and we are responsible for our proportionate share of their costs of operation. The EWA board approved the budget on April 28th, so just end of last month. Vallecitos is represented on the Encina board by Director Sanella and Hernandez, and Director Boyd Hodgson serves as Vallecitos' alternate on the board. So after the EWA board approves the budget, the board of each member agency has to approve the budget before the funding is available for EWA operations. I'm sure Scott will cover some of this. And on the wastewater side of our operations, EWA expenses are probably our single biggest expense when you include both their operating and their capital costs. So joining us tonight is Scott McClellan, and Scott is the Assistant General Manager of Encina. He's going to walk us through the budget that was approved by the EWA board, and Vallecitos' staff recommendation is that our board approve the EWA budget tonight. I should mention that Vallecitos' share of the EWA costs have been incorporated into our draft budget, which will be discussed in our next action item and up for the board's approval on June 2nd. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
Thank you, General Manager Broom. And it's always a pleasure to be able to present Encina's budget to different board. Again, thank you for the invite. Let me share my screen here. So I assume everyone can see the screen that's in front of them there. This is the, excuse me, sorry about that. This is the fiscal year 2022 proposed pension policy, operating and capital budget of the Encina Wastewater Authority. I want to start this conversation with a little bit of a schedule background. Glenn got into this, and I'll put a little bit more definition to it, but Encina's budgeting process is a little bit different than most typical agencies in that we have the 5 different member agencies that we need to coordinate with every year. And so we get our budget started fairly early in the year, usually late January, February timeframe. And then as we move into March, we develop the draft budget, and we spent quite a bit of time coordinating with the member agencies and the member agency managers in particular to develop the final budget that ultimately goes to the board. The Encina staff is very aware of the impact that our budget has on our member agencies. Glenn mentioned that in his comments there. And so we work closely on a monthly basis with the member agency managers to provide them with updates and a 30-day look ahead on the progress of our projects, as well as our budget expenditures and any other items that potentially could come up. So back to the budget schedule. In April, we have a series of meetings that we go through for our board to get the budget approved. And again, board of directors approved this budget on April 28th, and then therefore it gets forwarded to the member agency managers, or sorry, excuse me, the member agencies during the May and June board cycles. And then each one of those respective agencies approve the budget, as you have heard tonight and will potentially do as well. In July, ultimately, all of those approvals come back to Encina, and Encina puts in place the appropriations resolution, which then sets the controls and authorization to expend the budget that was developed and ultimately approved by each of the member agencies. So as we move into the budget details here, again, I'm providing a very high-level budget. There are a number of details and pages of budgets that have been developed for this, but I want to spend a little bit of time on how we develop this and what the elements of the budget are. So in FY 2022, there are 3 primary elements. That is the CalPERS pension liability funding policy, the operating program, and then the capital program. We handle each of these buckets in a separate manner, and I'll go through each of these in a little more detail. I do want to point out that you see the dollar change and the percent change in the columns on the far right. Those are relative to the FY 2021 and 2022 proposed budget. The PERS pension policy has a 0% change. The operating program has a 3.4% change. The capital program is down 3.9%. And the overall Encina budget for all the member agencies is down 0.7%. So as we begin to look at some of the details on this, let's start with the PERS pension liability. So this particular policy was developed by the board in early 2019 and was really intended, similar to what Vallecitos is doing, to pay off the pension as rapidly as possible to 100% payoff. There were some key tenets of that policy that were developed. They're listed there, the 5 of them. We want to be able to pay off the pension liability in 3 years. We want to be able to maintain flexibility in order so that we can mitigate investment market timing risk. In other words, dollar cost averaging there. We can avoid overpaying. And ultimately, we need to report back on a regular basis to the board. We just finished our most recent report out on this at the May 5th policy workshop that some of you were at there. And so I apologize for the details, but here's the policy brief and how this breaks down. So the activity to date so far is we have begun paying this pension policy down in the fiscal year 2020, 2021, and 2022. You can see by the end of June this year, there will be 8 payments that will have been made at $1 million apiece. So of the $13.5 million pension policy pay down, $8 million of it by the end of June will have been paid for. to continue that policy for the fiscal year 2022, we're budgeting the same amount, and that's the 0% increase in that I mentioned earlier there. There are some more recent actuarial valuations that were developed, and these are evaluations, as you know, from PERS that lag several years. And in this case, we've just recently got the June 30th, 2019 valuation that is putting that liability near a $15.1 million number. And earlier, I talked about the pension policy and the $13.5 million number. So that leaves a delta of about $1.6 million that may potentially not be paid off, again, based on the actuarial evaluation. So as we move into the fall, we'll likely get another actuarial evaluation that will be able to update this, and staff at Encina will be bringing that back to the board for potential direction on how to close that final $1.6 million gap at that time. So let's move on to the operating program budget portion of that. So this is the FY 2022 proposed operating budget that you see in front of you. I put this slide up so that you understand that, again, there's numerous buckets associated with just the operating portion of the budget. The key ones that are important to Vallecitos are the top two, which is the Encina Water Pollution Control Facility, or EWPCF. And this is the plant that's located in Carlsbad. Those of you that haven't been here, I hope you eventually get a chance to come down and see how sophisticated and complicated this plant is in the future. There's also the source control budget, and this budget is a specific line item, what we call an internal service fund, where costs associated with this are specifically allocated to control discharges within the collection systems of our member agencies. This is a requirement by the EPA to maintain this program. The following lines that you see are the Agua Hedondia Pump Station, Buena Vista, Buena Creek, Carlsbad, and Raceway Basin Pump Station. These are really budget items for what we call the remote facilities. And those remote facilities are owned by Vista or Carlsbad, or jointly owned by both of them. And so these budget items do not have any impact on the Vallecitos budget there. So looking specifically at the Vallecitos budget as it relates to revenue. And so we look at two sides of it. We look at the operating budget, and that's the money that it's going to take to operate the EWPCF and all the other remote facilities. And then we look at the other side, and this is relative to the member agencies. It's the revenue that Encina would need to realize to meet that budget. And so each one of the member agencies has their own line. I've highlighted the Vallecitos Water District line there in red that you can see. So you can see the total impact for the operating budget to Vallecitos Water District at that point. There are other, at the bottom of the table there, you'll see there are other revenues that Encina does bring in. And these would be revenues from tipping fees for fog, or brewery waste, laboratory services that are contracted out to Encina from different agencies such as Livenhain, even the Meadowlark facility, and several other entities in North County. We perform the lab services for them. There is also South Parcel leasing revenue that comes into that. And those are the big ones that we see with this. And so those revenues are taken directly off of the total bottom line for all of the member agencies. And so their budget is therefore reduced according to their unit I weighted ownership for that. So you see the total revenue summary for the entire Encina operating budget is a 1.9% increase next year. Again, Vallecitos has what's mentioned in the red box there. Looking specifically at the details on Vallecitos Water District, you see again the EWPCF with the increase there, the source control with that increase, and the other revenues that are added to that, for a total increase of 7.3%, or $237,000. The primary driver for that increase really has to do with the usage factors that are counted or attributed to the Vallecitos flow that comes into the EWPCF. These are measured on a quarterly basis. Staff and the member agency managers just finished about 6 months ago an audit of our financial plan and the allocation of how those usage factors are allocated to the member agencies. It was very well received by the member agencies and ultimately approved by the board last fall. So when you look at this, there are the usage factors that are associated with flows, biochemical oxygen demand, and suspended solids. The numbers that I presented there show a fairly consistent trend with Vallecitos. They continue to go up, and so therefore the budget that's associated with the EWPCF continues to rise for Vallecitos Water District. So let's move on to the capital program and look at some of the details associated with that. So similar to the operating budget, there are different buckets that the capital expenses are allocated towards. The largest and by far the lion's share of these capital investments deal with the capital improvements at the Encina EWPCF facility, excuse me. And when we look at the dollar change relative to the percent change, we're really talking about the estimate that we provided with each of the member agencies last year with what we expected to request in the FY 2022 relative to what was actually proposed this year. And so you can see that the capital improvements projects or CIP program had a very significant reduction in requests there to the tune of $4.7 million there. And this is primarily because of projects and the development of projects, and the projects as they move through their life cycle at Encina have slowed down to some degree due to COVID, but also because we've had some issues with contractors and we had to rearrange scope and have contractors finish their projects prematurely and move that scope into other projects, which slowed the development of the follow-on projects. And then we've also had contractors that have just been slow at getting started as well. So when you see this budget reduction, this means that there are funds that still need to be expended for these projects, and I'll go through some of these in the next slide. But we already have money in the budget this year that will be carrying forward to next year so that we can complete those projects or continue those projects through their life cycle there. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're not doing the projects. It just means that they've slowed down and the money's already been allocated there. There's also the EWPCF planned asset rehabilitation replacement. These are smaller projects that are done around the plant that can usually be completed within one budget year. And then the capital acquisitions items, again, smaller equipment purchases such as pumps and other equipment that is truly associated with plant operations. Again, the remote facilities, not an issue with Vallecitos because you don't have any remote facilities that Encina contract operates for. So the total reduction in the capital expenses is $16.3 million for all of the member agencies. Let me spend a little bit of time here, just very high level, again, going through some of the capital projects that we anticipate expending money on next year. I'm going to start on the right-hand side of the page there. You see that $3.9 million number. We anticipate next year spending this money on the clarifier rehabilitation project that is in progress right now. Phelon Construction is the contractor on that. Then in the upper left-hand side, you'll see $3 million on the digesters. We're kicking off a multi-year CIP project this coming year for digester rehabilitation to rehabilitate digester 4 and 5, and those are one of those three. There are two of the three larger digesters there in the picture. Then there's another $3.5 million for thickening improvements to the dissolved air flotation system, $2 million for HVAC improvements at the cogeneration facility, and then we'll be able this year to finish off for $2.7 million the primary area improvements project, or the rework of the headworks and screenings facility on the front end of the plant. Many of the assets that we're working on date back to the early 1980s and 1990s, and in the case of the Headworks project, date back even to the 1960s. So all of the work that you see going on here is really rehabilitation and rehab work for the facility, for the plant, which has been consistent with our previous capital improvement budgets in the past. None of the work that we've been doing recently or plan to in the next couple of years really is a capacity driven work. It's really rehabilitation work to, again, rehabilitate 30, 40, 50 year old assets that are already in the ground. So when we look at the summary of the capital allocation, again, relative to each of the member agencies and their portion of that, we see Vallecitos Water District consistent with the other agencies there with a 19.1% reduction in budget, or approximately $1 million over what was anticipated being needed there. So that with that, that's the summary of the capital, or excuse me, the budget for the Encina Wastewater Authority, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you.
President Snell, I would add real
Yes.
quickly, and Scott touched on it. So the most of the projects for Encina are replacement projects. And that means that those costs, when we pass them through our budget, will go into rates. So our ratepayers will pay for those. So they're not capacity increasing projects that would serve to increase the capacity fees or would be charged to developers. Similar to what we do internal, if we do a replacement project for one of our Vallecitos owned assets, we charge those to the ratepayers as opposed to a capacity increasing project. So just want to clarify.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Good job on the presentation. I will turn it over to my colleagues if there's any questions or comments that they would like to make at this time. Okay. I'll just add, since I serve on the board and the finance committee, that I've been, and I'm relatively new. I've only been on the board for 5 months, so really new, but and still definitely learning a lot. But I'll just say that I've been very impressed in my time there. The wastewater agency is world class when it comes to finding ways to innovate and be environmentally friendly, and those two things don't always coincide with being efficient or keeping costs down, right? But I will say that what I've noticed is that Encina has been able to at least try to achieve both of those efficiencies, but also be environmentally friendly and being innovative along the way. So that's important to me. And I know that's probably important to a lot of our customers as well. And so I appreciate the efforts, Scott, by you and the entire team down there.
Thank you. And we definitely appreciate the support of our board members as well as our member agencies and the member agency managers. So I appreciate your support and the approval of the budget as well. Thank you.
Okay. Director Hernandez.
Yes, behind the scenes, the managers of the various districts that comprise Encina also worked hard and were able to show areas of reduction that were carried out by the Encina budget. So we've all done a good job on this, and I thank you, Scott, for a great presentation, having seen it 3 times now.
All right.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and entertain a motion to adopt a resolution by us, the board, approving Encina Wastewater Authority's fiscal year 2022 operating and capital improvement budget, item 2.2.
Move to approve. Hernandez.
Thank you, Director Hernandez. There's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Director Boyd Hodgson. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, I have a motion to approve by Director Hernandez and a second by Director Boyd Hodgson. We'll go ahead and conduct a roll call vote. Director Boyd Hodgson?
Yes.
Director Pinnock?
Yes.
Director Hernandez?
Yes.
Director Ellithart?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you again, Scott.
Thank you.
You're welcome to stay. The best part of the meeting is still coming, but you're not. You don't have to if you don't want to.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
It's going to get really entertaining.
I can already wait.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. More budget stuff. It's all fun. Okay, moving on to item 2.3, Vallecitos Water District draft proposed fiscal year 2021-2022 budget.
Yeah, so item 2.3 is the next step in the process of the development and adoption of the Vallecitos budget. And tonight's item is informational only. We're not seeking board's approval on the budget at tonight's meeting. As I mentioned before, the budget approval is tentatively scheduled for our meeting on June 2nd. Feedback from the board at tonight's meeting, along with feedback from the workshop on May 6th and the numerous finance committee meetings, will be incorporated into the final budget. Finance Manager Owen will be making tonight's presentation. So Wes, take it away.
You're on mute, Wes.
Unmute, Wes.
You're still on mute. There you go.
There you go.
There you are.
Good evening, President Snell, members of the board. I'm going to share my slides. It is my pleasure to present the draft proposed budget for fiscal year 2022. So welcome back to the 6th meeting of the budget process, and hopefully the second to last. Not that we don't enjoy presenting on the budget or doing the work, but concluding the process always feels like an accomplishment. So tonight's presentation is going to be a full budget presentation. So this will include the water sales, water purchases, and the 5 and 10-year projections. And it's going to be very similar to the presentation you'll see on June 2nd, with the exception that at that meeting, any changes or recommendations from tonight's meeting will be incorporated. So I apologize, but you'll probably get to see this presentation twice. So the agenda for tonight, first, we're going to go over a recap of the budget process and calendar. And then we'll talk about the operating expenses for both water and sewer. After that, we'll talk about salaries and benefits. Then Mike will present on the water sales, purchases, and sewer revenues. Next, I'll talk about the capital budget for both fiscal year 2022, as well as the 5 and 10-year plan. And then we'll go into the reserve balances. After that, we'll talk about the CalPERS UAL funding and the options that will be presented to the board. And finally, the next steps in the budget process. So the budget process and calendar, you've seen this before, it's just a little bit different format. So as I've mentioned in the past, Ed's crew actually starts working on the budget in December and starts putting together requests. But formally, we start in the beginning of January and send out the budget calendar. And then in February, staff starts putting in the updated actuals for 2020 and working on projections for 2021. And then individual departments start working on their budget requests. On February 22nd, the Finance Committee met for the first time, and we went over the budget process and calendar, and then we went over the budget versus actual for the last 5 years. In March, we compiled the operating budget and we completed the fiscal year 2021 projections, and then we started working on the payroll estimates. And March 22nd, the Finance Committee met, and we reviewed the operating budget requests. Then in April, staff was incorporating the operating budgets, and we started preparing the draft capital budget. And April 12th, the Finance Committee met again, and we went over preliminary salaries and benefits, and we reviewed the capital budget requests. And then on April 26th, the Finance Committee met, and we actually had our consultants, Ralph Tellis, there to talk about the cost of service study and give an update. We also had our financial advisors, Feldman and Rolap, and they were there to talk about the potential debt issuance. Then in May, we started putting together the draft budget, and it was reviewed and revised and refined by management and staff. And on May 6th, we did a budget update for the full board and went over some of the draft budget. And we also talked about the CalPERS UAL. Today, on May 19th, we are reviewing the draft proposed budget, and we will go over the PERS scenarios that staff has developed for the board, and we will be looking for direction on those. And then in June, after this meeting, we will incorporate any board requested items and changes from tonight, and we will revise and refine the draft proposed budget to make it a recommended budget, hopefully for approval on June 2nd. So that's the process and calendar. Now I'm going to go into the budget itself. So this is page 2 of the draft proposed budget that was sent to you. This is the summary of the overall budget for fiscal year 2022. And as we go through this process, I'm going to be talking about a lot of 5-year and 10-year plans, but it's important to note that the board is only considering adopting a 1-year budget. So you're only really considering adopting, and not tonight, but June 2nd you will be, the fiscal year 2022 budget. And that budget total is $93.4 million right now. So before I go into that, since the draft budget at the 6th meeting, we've had a few changes, and those changes have mainly been in some CIP projects we were reviewing, and staff ultimately determined that we wouldn't be able to complete the amount that was in the previous draft budget. So the total budget went down from $95.9 million to $93.4 million for fiscal year 2022. And the majority of that is due to CIP, which was decreased in 2022 from 28.6 million down to $25.5 million. So the overall 10-year CIP budget didn't change, but the projects were just delayed or shifted out to future years. So the other two changes I did want to mention is that the PERS amount you'll note here actually changed from 2 million to 2,595,000, and we'll explain why that is as we get into the PERS UAL discussion. And then lastly, on page 31 of the budget, you'll see we've got 3 reclasses and 1 retitle, and those resulted in a salaries and benefit savings of about $43,000. So now looking at the total budget, the top 5 items are actually reserve funded. So first we'll go into operations and we'll talk about the reserves towards the end of the presentation. And the first thing I want to talk about is water operations. Water operations is budgeted at $12.9 million for this fiscal year, or 14% of the total budget. And this graph here is from page 10 of your budget, and it summarizes the water operating expense budget at $45.6 million. And very important to note is that of the 45.6 million, 32.7 million, or 72%, is for water purchases. So as you can imagine, if the water authority raises rates to us, it makes it very difficult for us to keep our rates the same or not raise rates and pass through that cost. Well, looking at the summary of the water operating expense budget, this is a summary of page 11 of the budget that was sent to you. And this rolls up the departments which are detailed on pages 12 through 14. And looking at budget to budget, we can see that the overall operating budget is budgeted to increase by $2,855,000. And that's a result mainly of water purchase increase of $2,722,000. As I mentioned, Mike will be talking about water purchases, so I won't steal his thunder. But the major changes in operations, and we talked about this at the draft budget presentation, the board workshop, operations really only increased by $87,000, and the major change there was for the proactive meter replacement program that we're proposing, which is $86,000. And overall, the controllable cost in water operations only increased by about 1.04%. So now back to the home page, page 2, the overall budget. Next, we're going to look at the sewer operations, and sewer operations was budgeted at 13.8 million, or 15% of the total budget. And this graph is from page 20 of your budget, and it shows the total wastewater operating expenses at 13.8 million, and 47% of the 13.8 million is for treatment costs, and those are costs from Encina, which is the budget we just approved, and the cost at the Metal Arc plant. So looking at the budget to budget for sewer operating expenses, this is a summary of page 21 of the budget that was sent to you, and we can see the total sewer revenues actually increased by $821,000. And this is mostly because of COVID, and it correlates with water sales increases. But again, Mike's going to present that. So I just wanted to mention that here. And then total sewer operating expenses are budgeted to increase by $462,000. And the major reason for that is an increase in the treatment cost of $258,000. And with the $258,000, Encina is actually increasing their budget to us by $294,000. So the other thing to note is that support is budgeted to increase by $215,000, and the majority of that is due to the engineering projects, which we talked about at the board workshop on the 6th, and those were the energy management study of $75,000, and there's a North County Recycled Water Coalition for $25,000. So next I want to talk about salaries and benefits. So this is the summary of page 25 of your budget. Trying to present everything in millions so we don't have too many numbers tonight. And this is budget 2021 versus budget 2022. And you can see here that the overall salaries are budgeted to increase by only $107,000 or 1%. And that's mainly a result of, we had a COLA in effect July 1 of 1.9% or $235,000. And we're also budgeting to fund the AGM position for 9 months at $207,000. So next, the total benefits increase, our budget increased by $100,000. And that's mainly a result of the increase in the group insurance. We had about, Kaiser increased their base rates by 9% in 2021, and Blue Cross increased theirs by 7.6%. So that's the reason for that budgeted increase. And then overall, total salaries and benefits is budgeted to increase by $207,000 or 1.3%. So even with a COLA of $235,000 and the AGM position at $208,000 and the group insurance increase of $160,000, the total salaries and benefits is still only budgeted to increase by $207,000. This next slide shows the budget to actual for salaries and benefits for the last 5 years. And the bottom portion shows the salaries, and they range from 9.7 to $10.3 million over the last 5 years with small variance. And total benefits has been from 5.7 to $6.3 million over the last 5 years. And the purpose of this slide is just to show that as a result of efficient operations and management scrutinizing the need for positions as they become vacant, we've been able to keep salaries very consistent over the last 5 years and actually prior to that as well. So the next slide was a request of the board workshop on the 6th. This slide shows the director's salaries, benefits, and expenses over the last 5 years, budget to actual. And you'll see the bottom of the chart, the blue portion shows the salaries. The orange portion are the benefits, and the gray at the top, those are the director's expenses. So the pattern you can see overall is that the actuals have been coming in under budget. So we've actually reduced the budget in 2021 down to 183,000. But then due to COVID and lack of travel, the actual came in at 137,000. But we've budgeted 183,000 again, so to allow for $50,000 of travel. Hopefully, we believe that to be conservative, especially from a salary or director's salary standpoint. So back to the home page. Now I think I get to pass the baton on to Mike Arthur. And Mike will be presenting on water purchases, water sales, and sewer revenues.
Great, thank you, Wes.
Do we ask questions before we go to that, or?
Yes, please. Director Pinnick.
Just one from an old cranky insurance guy. You mentioned the Kaiser and Blue Cross, those went up quite a bit. I mean, do we just accept that? Or, I mean, are there people calling in and looking at other options, other health plans available and options to provide for employees? Or is that just like, okay, Kaiser and Blue Cross raised them and we're going to kind of accept it?
So Rondi Emanuel, our Administrative Services Manager, could actually answer that question better than I can. I do know that the MOU has a cap on the amount we'll pay for employees at 7.5%. I'm not sure if that's looked at on an annual basis and restricted. But what I know is overall, the increase from year to year has been 5% or less for both of those. They just had a large increase this year. So we take the 5-year average and budget for it going forward. So we don't expect that they'll have another 9% increase next year, at least based on what I know.
Gotcha. I mean, did we ask though? I mean, did we get other options? Did we shop?
Yeah, I will find out for you. I'll have to talk to HR and Rondi.
Okay, because sometimes it's just good to shop around and see if there's other options out there.
Yeah.
To offer to employees if they're able to, just get other options to lower that cost.
I see Rondi unmuted her mic, so I'll let her speak here.
Thanks. Sorry, I wasn't prepared to talk, so I don't even have my camera on, but.
Sorry, Rondi.
No, it's okay. I just want to say, I think there's a little bit of a difference between how the budget is prepared and on our side, when we receive the rates, there's a timing issue. And I know finance is using actual rates and looking at projections, but from the HR side, we don't know what the rates from JPIA are going to be from our Joint Powers Insurance Authority until like August, September. So we do rely on the MOU to cap the costs. You know, that's how we control our costs. And then on a regular basis, we compare JPIA's rates to like CalPERS rates. I think in the past, we've also reached out to, I can't remember the name, but there's another organization that public agencies pool together for insurance. I think it's a risk organization, but I just can't think of the name of it right now. So we will look at the plans that our employees use the most, like in particular, Kaiser. The majority of our employees are on Kaiser. We know that Kaiser will typically have several years without rate increases, and then all of a sudden it'll be a double-digit increase. But thankfully, what JPIA does, because you know it's pooled insurance, they will try to look at their reserves or other changes they can make to the plans in order to keep costs down. So we don't have like experience rates for our particular agency, but JPIA is really good at trying to keep the rates down for all of the organizations that are participating.
Gotcha. So I didn't realize it was all through JPIA. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, no, they're probably doing their due diligence there, I'm sure.
They are definitely beating CalPERS rates whenever I try to compare. And again, it's not always apples to apples. You have to dig deeper into the plans and see what the benefits are. But typically, CalPERS rates tends to be higher for their health insurance than JPIA.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Director Pinnock. Director Boyd-Hodgson.
Thank you, President Snella. Along those similar lines, and I'm glad Director Pinnock asked the question that he did. I also had that question. But if AB 1400, which is the CalCare legislation, passes, has anyone or is anyone looking into how that might help us so that we don't have to pay Kaiser rates and Blue Cross Blue Shield rates? Does anyone have any information about that? And or do we have folks looking into that?
I don't think anybody here is looking into that specifically. We can certainly look into it, but oftentimes when those, if they become law, there's an implementation period which would allow us to figure that out in subsequent budget cycles.
Okay. And any other questions, Director Boyd-Hodgson?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other Director Althorpe or Hernandez? Do you have any questions or comments at this time?
Nope.
Okay, guys, thank you. I'll turn it back over to you, Wes.
Great, thank you. So see, I should have just let Ronnie answer that to begin with. I don't know why I even tried. So I'll pass it on to Mike at this point. Mike Arthur.
Thanks, Wes. President Sinella, members of the board. Wes, if you can advance one slide. So we'll go over a few things in these in this presentation. We'll go over the water sales, our customer distribution, basically the sales by customer type. We'll look at a historical sales volume. We'll review our projected revenue. We'll also look at the budget reconciliation, our budget from our current fiscal year 2021 to 21-22. We'll look at our water purchases by source, and then we'll review our sewer revenues. So next slide, Wes. So this slide shows our volumetric sales by customer type. It's not the number of customers we have, it's the volume of water sold to the customers. So you'll see residential customers account for about 2/3 of our sales, with irrigation and agricultural customers making up about 25%. And the remaining 11% is basically our commercial and industrial customers. So that's the next slide. So what this slide shows you is our 3-year history of sales volume along with our current year budget. So fiscal year 2018-19, which is the burnt orange line on the left, sales were about 13,600 acre feet. In our current fiscal year, we're budgeting about 14,100 acre feet. And you'll notice the yellow line, there was a dip in fiscal year 19-20. That was due to an unusually wet winter, so we did not sell as much water. The green line is our current budget. I'm sorry, not our current budget, our current projected actual. which is actually above our current budget. Our current budget, if you remember, we were very conservative. We did not know the impacts of COVID, so we were very conservative in our budget. In our budgeted fiscal year for 2021-22, we are projecting a sales increase in terms of growth of about 1 to 1.5%. And if you advance one slide, Wes, this just shows the breakdown by customer. And as I was saying, that residential customers, which is the next section, is about 2/3 of our customer base. What's interesting to notice is the green bar, the increase in sales, that was due to the COVID. A lot of people staying home, working from home, school from home. So residential usage went up where the commercial industrial usage went down. And I'll go over this a little bit later in the presentation, but we expected about a 4% decrease overall in demand, and we didn't see that materialize. We saw pretty much an even, actually an increase from the previous year. So what's the next slide? So our water revenues then. So our water revenues are comprised basically of three components. So our commodity, our ready to serve, which is RTS, and our other revenues. So our commodity revenues are about $31.2 million. Our ready to serve is about 14.3 million, with other revenue comprising about 1 million, for our total revenue budget of $46.5 million. What we also do when we do our demand projections, we look at kind of a bookmark to see what would happen if sales were to be 10% less or 10% more. So we do a sensitivity analysis, and this just shows what the net impact on our revenues would be if, for example, our sales were to go down 10%. If that were to happen, our net impact on our revenues would be about $1.6 million, $1.7 million to the negative. And then conversely, if sales were to go up 10% for some reason, we would see a positive impact on our net revenues of about $1.8 million. So next slide, Wes. So at our previous board workshop, we were asked to supply some details between the fiscal year 2021 budget and the 2022 budget. I believe Director Elithart, you specifically asked this question. And on paper, our budget to budget increase is 9.1%. But it's important to note that the budget for fiscal year 2021, that $29.9 million, again, that was a COVID conservative budget. As I said, we expected sales to decrease by about 4 to 4.5%. That did not materialize. What we did see, as I mentioned, was a shift from commercial industrial into residential. So as if you advance it one, what we're really looking at when we prepare the fiscal year 21-22 budget is the projected actual for the current fiscal year. And the projected actual is about $31 million. And because of the increased demand, and basically COVID didn't have as big of an impact as we thought, our net additional purchase water is about $1.1 million. That's 3.6% of that. So when we go and prepare our fiscal year 21-22 budget, we really base it on the projected actual amount of $31 million. So that's really like our starting point. So Wes, if you advance it one more slide. So starting with our $31 million basis part, we look at our potential cost increases from the San Diego County Water Authority. And right now we have in about 3.8%. Or $1.2 million in cost increases. We did get a preliminary notice from them that it potentially could be about 3.6%, excuse me, 3.6%. But that's just an average. Ours could be a little bit less. You also have to remember that we have a contract for desal water too. So even if the Water Authority's rate increase was 3.6%, it would only be on that portion of water that we buy from the Water Authority. We also have budgeted in increased sales or basically growth of about 1.25% to 1.5%. So that would increase the budget by $472,000 over our current projected of $31 million. So you'll see that the total budget for this year would be about $32.7 million. And Wes, if you can advance one more. So if you look at budget to budget, it is truly a $2.7 million increase or 9.1%. However, the majority of that is made up of the conservative COVID projections that we had. So if you advance one more, Wes. So our budget to projected increase, so that from the 31 million to the 32.6 is really about 5.3%. And those are made up of those two items that I mentioned, the 3.8% purchase water increase and the increase in growth of about 1.5%. So I'll stop here real quick and see if there's any questions on that before I move on.
Any questions at this time? Looks like you're good, Mike.
And I would add real quickly that the Water Authority isn't going to adopt its new rates until June. So it'll be past the time that we'll be adopting our budget. So we're going to have to go with our best educated guess at this point in time based on the information we've received from them.
So if you advance one more, Wes. So we will look at that 32.7 million. What's it comprised of? And we do have three, and I'll call them sources of water, even though all our water really is billed and comes from the Water Authority. We have a contract for desal water to purchase 3,500 acre feet. And for fiscal year 21-22, that total amount will be about $10.3 million. One more, Wes. We also have a contract for an exchange of water between us and OMWD for 2,750 acre feet. And that would be a total cost of about $3.7 million. And the remainder of our water, which would be about 9,200 acre feet, would come from the Water Authority directly at a cost of about $13 million. So if you add in the fixed cost, for a total of commodity costs of almost $27 million. And if you add in the fixed costs from CWA of the 5.6 million, that gets our total budget of 32.7 million. And that's for approximately 15,450 acre feet of water. And I think that's my last slide on water. So sewer is really pretty much easy. There are no rate increases for sewer. Sewer
I'm
is
sorry to
more.
interrupt, Mike.
Oh,
Before we go on, it looks like Director Ellithorpe also has his hand raised, but I have a question.
Sure.
Director Boyd Hodgson, go ahead.
Thank you. So I have sort of a fundamental question. You know, I can see that we get our water from three places: the desal plant, 11 Hain, and San Diego Water Authority. So what are we doing as an agency to look at other sources? And are there any limitations besides, you know, physical limitations that would prevent us from looking elsewhere?
So I'll jump in and address that, Director Boyd Hodgson. So we're doing a couple of things. So we've looked at groundwater in the past. We have money in the budget so that this coming year we'll be studying a direct or a potable reuse project, which would be basically taking water, wastewater that's treated at the Meadowlark facility and investigate whether it could be purified to the point where it could be used for potable purposes. We're also working collaboratively with Encina Wastewater Authority on their One Water project, which is very similar to what I just discussed, but it's just on a larger scale. So they take all the regional wastewater and are looking at developing water supplies for interested customers. I think, quite honestly, what the limitation will be is cost. So these alternative water supplies are very expensive. You can see that the desal cost at almost $3,000 an acre foot. These potable reuse projects are in that range too. They're probably in the $2,500 to $3,000 per acre foot. So if we start substituting those local supplies for these currently cheaper supplies, the water rates would definitely go up. So the reason we look at these alternative water supplies is really a hedge against the future for a couple of reasons. One is that the imported water may not be available in the quantities it is now, and it may be more expensive in the future as other regulations come in and other capital costs. So similar to the decision that the Vallecitos board made to enter into the desal contract, we thought it was in our ratepayers' best interest to have a local supply of high quality water that's drought proof. So we're doing quite a few things. We're somewhat limited by our topography. We don't have the same assets that other agencies have. For example, we don't have a good groundwater basin. We don't have a good surface water storage place. So our ability to do potable reuse projects is somewhat limited. And we are not able to import water from another provider. So for example, we can't go to another wholesaler similar to the Water Authority and have them bring a pipe and deliver water into our service area. You're prohibited from doing that when you're a part of the County Water Authority. So I hope that addresses your question.
It does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Alatar.
Yeah, so we have, looking at the decel, we have a settlement agreement on the decel litigation. So I believe it was pushing of 4,600 acre feet over the next 10 years. So why aren't we budgeting for that extra amount, that average of 460 acre feet a year?
Yeah, so we didn't do that because it won't make a difference from a cost perspective. So if we get access to that 4,600 acre feet over 10 years, that water will be provided at the blended water rate, which will be the same as what you see as the SDCWA rate there. So the amount of actual molecules of decel may go up, but the price that we pay will be locked in at 3,500. So we'll be paying the same price for the water that we would otherwise get from the water authority, but it would be of a higher quality and a higher reliability and drought proof.
And so yeah, it might be helpful just to show maybe two different decel.
Okay.
No, with the different per acre foot cost.
We could do that.
That's a great suggestion, Director Alatar. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just afraid we're going to lose track of that after all this hard work getting that settlement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Good suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, operationally, we will certainly be tracking that. And from a cost perspective, it probably doesn't make a difference, but you're right. From a transparency perspective, it would probably be good to show those.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments at this time? No? Okay, Mike.
So I'll move on to the sewer then. As I was saying, sewer is a lot easier to predict. Really, the weather, the rainfall, the usage doesn't really have much of a variance in our terms of our total revenue. So our revenues are pretty much flat from our current fiscal year budget. So our total revenues are about $21 million. And the majority of that is made up of our sewer service charges of about $17.8 million. We also include almost $3 million in reclaimed water sales and other revenues of about $300,000. And that, I believe, is the end of my presentation. So if there's any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I will turn it back to Wes.
Director Alatarp, is your hand up from last time, or do you have a new question?
Oh, I just have one clarification question, I guess.
Yeah.
Mike, you indicated that you assumed a cost increase on imported water supply from the water authority. I think you said 3.8%.
Correct.
And so for this budget as a whole, I don't know who this question is good for, but have we developed this budget with no rate increase in mind?
Right now, the rates are projected to stay pretty much the same. There may be, with the cost of service study, there may be some different reallocations, but total revenue is projected to be the same. So the net impact on the customer would be either negligible or not at all.
So even with the water authority increase, we don't project a need for a rate increase?
Right now, that is correct. And a lot of that is due to the being very conservative with COVID last year. We are seeing sales higher than we expected. So that actually helped us in terms of revenue.
Okay, so another question related to rates. Maybe this goes to Wes. Looking at the reserve projections for future years, what kind of rate increase do you assume on those longer term projections?
So I can take care of that one too.
Okay.
It's probably in the neighborhood. We're looking at potentially doing a 4-year study, probably in the neighborhood of 3.5 to 4.5% over the next 4 years or so. And that would start potentially either July 22 or most likely January 2023. And Wes or Glenn, please correct me if I misspoke.
Oh,
Yeah, we have.
Go ahead, Wes.
Yeah, we had 3.5 to 4% built in for the 5 years, and the rates would be effective for the first time on January 1st, 2023.
Yeah, and that's 3.5 to 4% per year,
Per
not
year.
not aggregate over the four-year period.
Right. Thank you.
So if there are no other questions, thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
So if there are no other questions, I'll get back to the home page. And the next thing I want to talk about are the capital costs, or CIP. And the budgeted CIP for fiscal year 2022 is $25.4 million. And this is actually up from last year, about $1.1 million. We budgeted $24.3 million last year. And the total 10-year capital plan is $134.5 million. And I'll show you the difference between the 10 years and on the next slide. So looking at the 10-year plan, budget to budget, so this is our total budgeted capital 10-year plan, included in the fiscal year 2022 budget. And this is, details to this are on pages 34 of your budget, and the vehicles and equipment are on page 114 as noted here. But the total capital budget for 10 years is $134.5 million. And that's made up of carryover projects of $52.5 million. And carryover projects are just projects that were budgeted for and worked on in previous years and are still continuing this year. They may just be multi-year projects. And then we have our new CIP requests of $41.5 million. Those are new requests for both carryover projects as well as new projects. And this year we actually have 36 new projects being requested, and the total for the new projects is 36.6 million. But important to note there is that of that 36.6, $31.8 million are for Encina projects. And last year, the new projects, we had 28 projects for about 61.3 million, and 29.1 of that was Encina. And the next item here are the future CIP requests. And future projects are projects that will not be worked on in the budget year 2022, but they will be worked on in the 5-year and 10-year plan, so we include them for prudent financial planning. And then the vehicles and equipment is budgeted at $662,000. That is down from $880,000 in the previous year. And overall, the total 10-year capital budget is budgeted to decrease by $10.7 million. And the reason for that is that new CIP requests are budgeted to decrease by $25.6 million. So now I'll look at the capital spending over the next 5 years by component. So this slide shows the CIP costs for the next 5 years by water and sewer. And we can see in the bottom left that the water projects for fiscal year 2022 are budgeted at $7.3 million. And the sewer projects are budgeted at $18.2 million. And of that 18.2, $5.4 million is for Encina projects. And the total 10-year plan, the water projects are $34.1 million and sewer are $100.4 million. And of the $100.4 million, $33.1 million are for Encina projects. So next we'll look at the reserve projections. So now that we've looked at the operating expenses for both water and sewer, we've looked at salaries and benefits, we've looked at all the capital costs, and we've looked at water revenues and sewer revenues. All of this rolls up into the reserve projections into our 5-year plan. So and this is actually a summary of the back of the budget, pages 117 through 122. And what this shows is how that all rolls up. So we can see the beginning reserve balance for fiscal year 2022 is $81.1 million projected. And from there, we have the operating transfers being transferred in. Operating transfers are the excess of revenues over expenses for both water and sewer. And that's budgeted at $8.2 million into reserves. And after that, we have our non-operating revenues, such as capital facility fees, property taxes, RDA pass-throughs. We also have our debt proceeds, project reimbursements, and investment earnings. And then we can see our capital outlay. These are our CIP costs that we just talked about for fiscal year 2022 of $25.4 million. So that'll be spent out of reserves. And our vehicles and equipment, our PERS funding, and our debt service also come out of reserves. And that gets us to our ending balance projected for fiscal year 2022 of $96.3 million. And I know this is a lot of numbers and a lot to go through, but this shows how we do our 5-year plan. And this is one of the things that the credit agencies look at. So Fitch, Standard & Poor's, and Moody's look at this and they say that we have a sound financial plan over the 5 years. And things that they look at here that we are within our reserve policy, we have sufficient reserve levels, that we've got we meet the required debt service coverage ratio and the days in cash. So if we look here, we can see there's a floor in the ceiling of our reserve policy. And down bottom, we have our debt service coverage and our days in cash. Our bond covenants say that we have to maintain a minimum of 115% debt service coverage. So we're well above that. We're in the 300s for all 5 years. And our days in cash starts at 578 and goes down to 432. And based on discussions with, and I'll go over more about days in cash, but based on discussions with Fitch, they've mentioned that, with our other rating criteria, as long as that's over approximately 300 to 350 days, we should be able to maintain our credit rating. So next I'll look at this in graphical format. It'll be a little more exciting. Oh, before I do that, I wanted to note that the debt proceeds are also included in the reserve projection. So here you can see the $28 million we'll be talking about today and the potential debt issuance. And those funds are actually expected to go into reserves in fiscal year 2022. And then in 2025, we have project expenditures that may require us to look at another potential debt issuance of about $20 million. And of that, $11.9 million will be spent in 2025, and the remaining $8 million will be spent in 2026. So now I'll look at it graphically, and here are reserve balances, the historical from 15, 16, all the way to projected 2022. And you can notice our reserves have been increasing every year until 2021, and that's sewer. The majority of that is sewer decreasing, and that's really a result of the San Marcos Interceptor, the work that was done on that. And then they're projected to increase again in 2022 as a result of the debt proceeds going into reserves. So next I want to look at the water replacement reserves. And as you know, these are the reserves that we look at when setting rates. And the water replacement reserves are required to have a minimum of 180 days of operating expenses or 6 months of operating expenses, plus 3 years of projected asset replacement costs for the floor. And the floor for 2022 is 17 million, and it's projected to be 20 million by 2026. For the ceiling, we need 6 months of operating reserves and 10 years of projected system replacement costs. And for 2022, the ceiling is 47 million. By 2026, it'll be 53 million. So now looking at our budgeted projected water replacement reserves, this chart shows what we're projecting for replacement reserves. And in 2022, it's projected at or budgeted at 36 million. And by 2026, it will be at 36 million. So that 36 million is above the floor of $20 million and within policy limits. Next, I'll look at the total water reserves. And the floor and the ceiling are the same, but this just combines, it adds in the capacity fund reserves and combines with the replacement just to see how we are in relation to the floor and the ceiling. And this is what the total reserves will look like, inclusive of the debt issuance. And that's budgeted to be 39 million in 2022, and it'll be 37 million by 2026. And again, it's important to note that this is inclusive of the debt. So next we'll look at the wastewater replacement reserves. And again, we are required per the reserve policy to have 6 months of operating reserves plus 3 years of projected system replacement costs. And for 2022, that's 27 million. By 2026, it'll be 34 million as the floor. And the ceiling is 6 months of operating costs plus 8 years of projected system replacement costs for sewer. And the ceiling is 70 million for 2022 and 84 million by 2026. And the overall wastewater replacement reserves in the budget for the 5-year plan look like this. So in 2022, we're budgeted to have $51 million. And by 2026, sewer replacement reserves will be down to $42 million. And that's because of the CIP projects I showed you in the CIP costs over the 5 years. There's just a lot more sewer projects than there are water projects.
Hey, Wes, if we can just pause there for a second. I have a hand up by Director Elthart.
Thank you, President Snella. Wes, these graphical depictions are really helpful, at least for me. And I'm wondering, can they be put in the written draft budget? You know, all I see in that is columns of numbers, and it's really hard to put it together like these graphs do.
Yeah, we might be able to incorporate something like that at the end. It'd be probably a lot easier on the readers, I think. Yeah.
And one other question, and it's related to rates that you've assumed on the wastewater side. Have you made assumptions on future rate increases as well?
I believe the assumption for rate increases were, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, 2.5%?
2.5 to 3, I believe. If it's not, we'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
So if there are no other questions, I'll go on to the next slide. So next, we're going to talk about the sewer reserves in total. Same floor and ceiling, but this just incorporates the capacity reserves. And again, this is the budgeted wastewater reserves in total, and it's 57 million by 2022, and projected to be 47 million by 2026. And this is inclusive of debt proceeds as well. And the sewer capacity fund gets approximately 16 million in debt proceeds per the budget. So next, I mentioned we would talk about days in cash. This slide shows the historical days in cash of the district. And it's important because it is a key rating criteria in maintaining our AA+ rating. And the orange line represents the Fitch AA+ rating, the median for the Fitch AA+ rating. This is the latest information we have is from 2020, and the median was 545 days. I contacted them and they haven't updated it yet for 2021. They said it should be out the first week in June and would send it over to me when it was ready. But if we assume it's the same, we can compare that to our days in cash. And for 2022, as a result of the debt proceeds, the days in cash goes up to 578 days. And later it comes down in the 5 years down to 432 by 2026. But as I mentioned, we believe that's a sufficient reserve levels based on conversations with Fitch. And just a little historical recap. The district was rated a AA prior to 2013. And we were upgraded in 2013 to a AA+ by both Fitch and Standard & Poor's. And then we were reaffirmed in 2015 and again in 2017. And very recently, in August of 2020, we were reaffirmed at a AA+ again. And some of the notes there were that we had very strong revenue defensibility, a low operating risk profile, favorable service area, affordable rates, and sound debt coverage and liquidity levels. So with that being said, staff believes that our overall revenues and rates are sufficient to maintain our reserve levels and our debt service coverage and our days in cash required in order to maintain our credit rating. So that's the most of the budget presentation. Next, I want to go on to the CalPERS UAL funding policy if there aren't any questions on what's been presented so far.
I don't see any questions, Wes.
Thank you. So the CalPERS UAL funding policy. So we went over some of this. It's going to be a recap of the board workshop, at least at the beginning, and then I'll go into our options. So as you know, we started a 3-year payoff plan, our funding policy in 2020. Last year that was changed to a 2-year payoff, and the balance at that time was $11.3 million. So in 2020, we actually made a payment of $8 million, and then in 2021, we paid $4 million per the 2-year payoff plan. The remainder to be looked at the discretion of the board this year in 2022. So our policy states that we'll do annual policy revisions. So we will revise the policy annually when the new actuarial reports are released, and we'll include them in the current year's budget. And the most recent actuarial evaluation was 2019, and we got that in August of 2020. So it's important to note they're always a year behind. I'll probably be harping on that a lot. But then our policy states we will maintain flexibility by not locking in any arrangements with CalPERS. So we don't have any requirement to pay anything. All of this is at the discretion of the board. And we will avoid overpaying the liability. We'll do this by reassessing the final year's payment as necessary. And that's where we are now. We're in the final year of the 3-year payoff. So this is sort of the critical year to reassess and make sure that we don't overpay the balance. And finally, we'll provide regular updates to the Finance Committee and the Board of Directors. So next, this is the CalPERS UAL funding policy that was approved in the fiscal year 2021 budget. And you'll note here that the additional discretionary payment for 2021 was $4,027,000. And the remainder of $7.2 million or $7.3 million was to be paid in 2022 at the discretion of the board upon reassessing the balance. And also very important is the required payment on the UAL. So CalPERS sends us a bill every year for the payment on the liability. And the bill for 2022 was supposed to be $1.6 million. After we made the $4 million payment, they revised that and they sent us a letter along with our new balance, our new liability. They also sent us a new bill, and that bill was at $734,000. So that payment resulted in an $814,000 savings to the district. And every time we make a discretionary payment, it will have savings in that year and future years. And the approximate interest savings on both of these payments was $9.8 million. And looking at the $4 million payment, the approximate savings on that by itself was $4.2 million. So next, I wanted to mention the last time we made a payment, we paid in $4 million in, I think it was September, October. And after we made the payment to CalPERS, they sent us the letter with a new invoice and the balance said that our current balance was $7.7 million or $7,690,000. So then we contacted them this year to look at what our liability was, because this is based on the 2019 valuation as well. So we wanted to get an idea what the current balance would be so we avoid overpaying it. And what they had told us had to do with their investment returns. So this shows the CalPERS historical investment returns. And we noted at the last meeting that they're very consistent in their returns. I like this negative 24%. But that was, it's 2009, it was a long time ago. But important here is the blue line. The blue line represents the 7% return, which is the CalPERS expected return in order for them to achieve their results and pay out with their requirements. If they do not achieve a 7% return on their investments, then it's considered a loss to the district and increases our liability. So when asked, and actually there are releases with this, and the actuary stated that they actually realized a 4.55% return in 2020. But the good news, so that's below the 7%, so that will result in a liability to the district. So that will increase our liability. So the 7.7 would increase. But the good news is in 2021, and it's May 20th now, this was just a couple weeks ago, talking with the actuary, they estimate the returns this year at 15%. So a 15% return in 2021 would mean an 8% gain, and that would be a major gain for the district. And
Hey Wes, do they anticipate that 15%? Is that a calendar year, or is that
fiscal year
for them as well? Right.
Yes.
When does their fiscal year end?
Same as ours. So June 30th.
So if the markets tank in the second half of the year, we're still locked in at this estimated 15% gain?
Well, I mean, I talked to them 2 weeks ago, so that was in April. So that really only left 2 months left in the fiscal year for their gains. So unless something major happens in May or June, then it's pretty realistic. So I watched a webinar which stated that, and then I confirmed it with the actuaries that they're expecting a 15% return.
Okay, thank you.
So if they do achieve the 15% return, that's great for us. And it's great for us because we've contributed $12 million over the last 2 years, and that $12 million gets a 15% return. So looking at what that means to our liability and what we want to consider paying off, the 4.55%, as I mentioned, would be a loss, and that would increase our liability about $1.9 million. So we'd be about 9.7. And then the 15% return would actually be a $6 million gain on our liability. So that would decrease our liability down to about $3.5 million. So based on the estimated balance, we want to look at how we go about paying off this $3.5 million and avoid overpaying the liability. So now I'll show you some options that staff has prepared. So some scenarios. First, we could pay off 100% of the balance. So we could send in a check for $3.5 million. And if we did that, we would have an estimated interest savings of $2.8 million. And as I mentioned, it reduces our required UAL payment. So over the 5 years in the budget, we would reduce our UAL payment by $1.2 million. So that's an additional savings. And we would be 100% funded by the end of 2021. And that's an estimated 100% funded because there could be other actuarial assumptions or method changes or other things like that. But overall, we'd be 100% funded. And then other things we look at when considering making these payments are that our days in cash would be above sufficient for the rating criteria. They'd be at 573, so it'd still be sufficient. And our reserve levels would still be above the floor if we made this payment. So the next option we looked at was to pay the most expensive liability. So as I mentioned in the board workshop, we have a liability for each year, and actually several for each year. So we looked at all of those liabilities and we actually did scenarios where we paid off each one and found out what the interest savings would be. And the most expensive or most beneficial one would be one that's $2.6 million. That results in an interest savings of $2.7 million. And it's really only $96,000 less than paying off the full $3.5 million. And then overall, the reduced payments over the 5 years would be $1.1 million, or $1,083,000. And if we make that $2.6 million payment, we'll be 99% funded. So the final option we looked at, our final scenario, is to pay it off over 2 years. So if we split the $3.5 million in half and send in a $1.7 million payment, then we actually would have estimated interest savings of $2.6 million, almost 2.7. And then the savings difference would be $161,000 versus paying off the full 3.5 million. And the reduced UAL payment over the 5 years would be a savings of $1,033,000. And we would be about 98% funded after making that payment. So looking at those three options, what are some of the pros and cons? Well, the pros are the higher the extra payment, the greater the interest cost savings. If we pay off the 3.5, we maximize our interest savings. And the higher payment results in a higher reduction in the UAL payment. So the reduced payment over 5 years is also greater if we pay off the full amount. The cons are the higher payment equals a bigger draw in reserves up front. So it'd be reduced reserves this year. And the higher the extra payment, the greater exposure to market fluctuations. And that's true, but it also could be a benefit. We paid $12 million and got a 15% gain. So you can look at it either way. And then finally, the last con I have is that it's less flexibility to react to future year changes and assumptions. And that's the biggest thing. If we pay off the 3.5 and the 15%, if there are other assumptions that result in a larger gain for some reason, we could be overfunded. So with all those options and the pros and cons, staff is actually recommending to pay off the most expensive liability at the $2.6 million. We believe that gives us significant interest savings and reduce UAL payment, and still lets us maintain flexibility for next year to consider paying it off. And doing that, the year 2 payment would be approximately $923,000 after paying the 2.6. So that's the PERS UAL discussion. If there are no questions, we actually will be looking for direction from the board on this to hopefully choose one of these three options.
Does that conclude your presentation, Wes?
I do. I have a next steps part of the presentation. I just want to see if there are any questions.
Okay.
But
Well, this is a good spot to pause real fast. Let me just check and see if there's any questions at this time. It doesn't look like it. So you're good to go.
Thanks, sir. So the next steps in the budget process, we will incorporate any changes into the fiscal year 21-22 budget, changes from this meeting or recommendations. And then on June 2nd, we will present a recommended budget for adoption. And that does conclude my presentation. And I will see you on June 2nd, whether you like it or not.
Okay, thank you, Wes. That was a lot to take in, and I'm sure it was a lot of preparation on yours and Mike's part, and you guys did a wonderful job. Thank you. I'll go ahead, and I know we've kind of commented and asked our questions along the way, but before we move on to, let me ask I'll ask the first question. You said you were looking for some direction on the PERS. Did you mean tonight, or did you mean on June 2nd?
So we would like direction tonight to from the board to say which option they would like included in the budget to be approved on June 2nd. So rather than wait, it'd be good to have it included in that so we can present it and get it approved, hopefully.
Yeah,
Okay.
President Sinella, in an ideal world, the budget that we bring forward on June 2nd would be ready for adoption. I mean, obviously, if the board wanted to have changes, they could, but so we'd like to get as much feedback today so that we can bring back the budget on June 2nd that hopefully addresses all the comments that were brought up today.
Okay, great. So with that, then we'll go ahead and entertain any questions or comments or any feedback or direction that any of my colleagues want to give on the PERS matter at the very least.
Well, not to me, I mean, it's a no-brainer. I don't know about anybody else, but yeah, I would say pay it over the 2 years recommended for sure. I mean, if I'm seeing something, if I'm not seeing something, please let me know, but it makes sense to me.
Okay, thank you, Director Pinnock. I see hands up. Director Alathar.
Yeah, I can support staff's recommendation of paying the most expensive UAL debt.
Okay, thank you.
Second option.
Okay, thank you. Director Boyd Hodgson.
I also support staff's recommendation to pay the most expensive. It seems to sort of split the difference and try to guard against overpaying.
Fernandez.
Likewise,
Good.
likewise for me.
Okay, thank you. And I would agree with that. I like staff's recommendation. This whole matter is uncomfortable and costly for our ratepayers. Tens of millions of dollars over the last few years. But I do applaud staff and the board for trying to be proactive on it. I'm not personally convinced that when we talk about being 100% funded, I'll believe it when I see it. Fingers crossed, but I don't believe it. I think that this is going to be a money drain forever, and it's really going to be costly to our ratepayers, and it's a bit unfortunate. But I do appreciate the effort put towards it, making a very bad situation somewhat good, if you can put it that way. And thank you. Okay. So did you get the direction you needed? Great.
Yeah, I
And
believe
then
so, yes.
no vote is required on this. So this is for information only. And so we'll move on to item 2.4, potential debt issuance.
For my information only, quick question.
Yes.
Just for my information only, and I'm going back just one to the Encino. We adopted the budget for Encino. What happens if we don't adopt that? If we didn't, I mean, has that ever not been adopted and accepted? And what would happen?
Yeah, so I don't think it's ever happened, but if it did, it requires unanimous approval by all the member agencies. And if they don't get unanimous approval, then they're stuck with the same budget levels of the current year. So they would have the same capital expenditures authority. They would have the same operating budget authority. So it doesn't go to zero. It just stays where the levels are in the current fiscal year. And then clearly there'd have to be a lot of discussions that would take place about what the impacts of that budget change would be. But procedurally, that's what would happen. They'd be locked into the current budget, and then you can bet a lot of meetings would happen subsequent to that to try to make the member agency that was dissatisfied, try to get them to a comfort level.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, okay. Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Before we go to the next item, can we take a bio break? 2 minutes?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. How many minutes did you ask for, Director Boyd Hodgson? I'm sorry, I missed that. Did you say 5 or 10?
I said 2, but
2.
Okay. I'll take 5.
Let's do 5 minutes. It sounds like there's consensus.
Glenn, do you want me to pause the recording?
What's that, Jonathan?
You want me to pause the recording?
Yeah, I was going to do that. I was just afraid I'd forget to restart it. But if you're there to help me, go ahead and pause it, and together we'll hopefully remember to restart it.
Perfect. Doing it now.
All right, we're back recording.
Okay, well, welcome back, everybody, after our short little break. And we'll go ahead and continue with item 2.4, the proposed debt issuance.
Yeah, so this is item 2.4 is just a continued conversation regarding the possible issuance of debt. We did discuss this item at the board workshop on May 6th, and tonight we'll be discussing the next steps in the process. And again, like on the 6th, we're not seeking like final board approval to issue debt at tonight's meeting, but we are seeking approval to move the process forward. And Wes will be presenting this item. And I believe we have a special guest, Laura Carpenter is probably with us tonight too. So Wes, over to you.
Thank you, Glenn. Yes, Laura Carpenter is with us tonight, and she'll be presenting the majority of it. I just wanted to get it started with talking about some of the reasons why we're considering issuing debt. And this is just a recap pretty much of the board workshop. But since we just saw the reserve balances and the draft proposed budget, I figured I'd show it using those slides. So these are the wastewater reserves that we just saw in total in the proposed budget. And the reasons we're looking at issuing debt is because if we don't issue debt, this is what the reserves look like without the debt proceeds. So in 2024, we'd have to consider issuing debt because we'd be in danger of falling below the floor, and that wouldn't be in compliance with our reserve policy. And also worth showing is that the total reserves without debt would fall below the floor in 2025, and that falling below the floor is not not good for rating criteria. But in addition, our days in cash would be at 247 days and 198 days by 2025 and 26 if we do not consider issuing the debt at this time. So with that, I will pass it on to Laura.
Hey, Wes, before we make that transition, I do have a hand up. Director Boyd Hodgson.
Thank you. If you'll just indulge me for a moment. So I understand that we have the floor and the ceiling, and I understand that that's set by a policy that the board created. Can the policy be changed to lower the floor? And historically, has that ever happened? And have we ever, I'm just wondering, is the floor that we have right now, have we ever been in danger of crossing it? I guess I'm trying to get just sort of some perspective on these numbers that are arbitrary because we've set them.
Well,
or
so
the board in previous years have set them.
So I apologize for interrupting right there, but they're actually not arbitrary. They're set based on industry best practices and comparing to other districts and agencies' reserve policies. So we use the GFOA best practice in setting these, and they recommend 3 years of projected replacement system assets, as well as 6 months of operating reserves.
Okay, thank you. I think you've mentioned that before, but I needed a reminder. Thank you.
So,
okay. Go ahead, Wes.
Thank you, Director Sanella. So with that, I'll pass it on to Laura Carpenter.
Great, thank you very much, Wes. If you bear with me, I will go ahead and share my screen if possible. All right, wonderful. Well, good evening, Mr. President, members of the board. Pleasure to be here with you this evening. My name is Laura Carpenter. I'm a vice president at Fieldman Rollman Associates, and we are the municipal advisor assisting the district here today with the debt issuance and throughout the process over the next couple months to ensure the successful closing and the receipt of funds for the proposed debt. What I want to do is go over a few slides that will be an overview from our board workshop that occurred on May 6th, but also provide an update on what has occurred to date since we spoke last. So we provided to the board on May 6th an update of the market conditions, as well as proposed debt issuance structures and cost of potential capital projects that may be incurred on debt financing. And now that we have a budget in front of us that proposes a more fine-tuned analysis, we'll go into a little more detail today on some of those cost options and financing structures that can be approved by the board at a later date. Pursuant to board approval and direction, we sent out a request for proposals for a competitive bid for underwriting firms on May 10th. We expect to receive responses from highly qualified investment banking firms on May 27th. Following an internal review of the responses received, as well as discussion with staff on a recommended underwriter, we'll be looking at all qualifications, responses to our questions, as well as the fees proposed by each underwriting firm. Our recommendation will then be brought back to the board on June 2nd to recommend and approve the actual underwriting firm that we'll use on this transaction. Since we met last, District Council, Bond Council has been working diligently on the legal documents as well as the disclosure documents to be in a position to bring back to the board at a later date in August for a full review and approval of the requirements necessary to proceed with pricing and selling the bonds in August. What we wanted to do here today is give a detail of what has occurred and a brief overview of the market since we spoke last. What we've shown here on this spreadsheet is the tax-exempt benchmark curve, which is the AAA GeoBond municipal market data. So this is the benchmark used by the public finance market for issuing any types of tax-exempt long-term fund financing in the public markets. Unlike a mortgage that uses one fixed interest rate, when you issue public debt, you actually take a look at multiple maturities over the course of the amortizing debt structure. So here we have the entire curve from years 1 to year 30 and each individual yield by maturity. Each one of these yields will be addressed and used by the underwriter and for purchasing as well for selling to investors who will be buying the bonds of the district. What this graphical representation reflects is the actual interest rates market and the environment that has occurred on the interest rates and yields since 1998. What we have here is a snapshot as of May 14th on that 30-year curve from years 1 through 30, ranges from a low of under 20.2% to about 1.6%. We've compared that May 14th yield curve to all of the yields since 1998. And what we've shown on the bar graphs on the very bottom of this chart on the x-axis is over that span of more than 20 years, interest rates have only been lower 1.75% of the time on the 30-year curve, for example, or have only been lower about 2.5% on the short-term end of the yield curve between 5 and 10 basis points. So in other words, we've had yields be higher almost 99% of the time or almost 97% of the time. So we're still in a very low, historically low interest rate environment, which is a great opportunity for the district to take advantage of for needed capital replacement costs. Here on this slide, we fine-tuned some of the analysis provided to us by staff in connection with the types of funds that will be used from proceeds received on the bond transaction. We are looking at about $28 million of bond proceeds. Part of that, a majority of it, almost $21 million, will go to reimburse the district for prior expenditures that have been incurred over the past 3 to 5 years. And we've listed here the types of projects that those monies were expensed on, as well as over the next 2 to 3 years, the types of funding that the district will be needing on the capacity side. So that's additional $6.9 million of new funds that will be incurred and spent by the district and acquired through the issuance of bonds. And in total, that results in about $28 million of debt financing opportunity. When we compare that to the types of cost for ratepayers to repay this type of debt, in order to issue about $28 million proceeds, as well as to acquire enough funds to meet the cost of issuance of those bonds, we've calculated a total debt service cost of about $41 million, and that spans the repayment of principal and interest over the 30-year period. And assuming a level debt service structure, which is equal payments every single year for 30 years, that is approximately $1.37 million annually and results in almost 2.65 all-in borrowing cost. So lower than 3% to issue 30-year debt is a very strong and tempting all-in TIC, which is promising for today's market. This will fluctuate as the market moves day to day until we're able to fix that interest rate at pricing, which will be later in the year around August of 2021. The district has an opportunity to structure the debt as they think best in order to optimize some of their existing debt structure as well. We don't have to make a decision today or even next month, but I wanted to present some options to the district and to the board that we'll be looking at going forward. All of these structures can be finalized prior to pricing, so we have a few months to contemplate it, but I want to give a little bit of a flavor of what items you could be addressing, you could be looking at. First and foremost, the top chart identifies structuring the $28 million of funds over a level 30-year repayment structure, which results, as I noted before, in $41 million of total debt service or average annual debt service of about 1.37. As you see, as that compares to the overall aggregate debt profile of the district, when you include the outstanding debt of the 2015 bonds, as well as the 2012A loan, you'll see debt service is pretty steady between 2024 and fiscal year 2031, and then drops to about 4 million in 2032, and then drops again to that 1 million stature in 2037. Now, this does not anticipate any future funding needs of the district over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, but it's a snapshot in time of what the district has outstanding today. Some of the flexible options the district has in incurring new debt is what we call a wrapped structure. you can take a look at the existing profile that's outstanding for the district and structure the new debt so you can levelize the aggregate debt service due and payable to the bondholders and that have been paid by ratepayers on the rates. What you'll see by pushing out the principal on the new debt, which is the blue bars on the very lower hand chart, by pushing out the principal and levelizing the debt, you'll see the debt service payable by the district is even or level from 2024 through fiscal year 2036, and then drops off as you pay off the remainder of the 2021 debts. And most of that has to do with the structure of the 2015 bonds that, as you see here, matures in 2036. This structure does reduce the total debt service payable by approximately $300,000 and a slight reduction in the average annual debt service as well, shown here on this graph. There's other structures that we'll be presenting to the staff, and when we have an underwriter on board in June, we'll be presenting it further for additional discussion and finalization going forward. In order to give an update on the next steps the board will be incurred on the coming months is in the month of May, we've had some presentations with the board to get approval of the direction to move forward. As I noted, we sent out the request for proposals for underwriting services and expect to receive that later this month. And we've begun work, as I said before, on the legal documentation and necessary disclosure documents, which is the market offering the district uses to market the bonds to potential investors and eventually sell it on the pricing date. Come June, we'll be looking to, or on June 2nd, we'll be coming back to the board to approve the section of the underwriter, as well as approve a reimbursement resolution that indicates the types of projects that can be reimbursed by the district on debt issuances going forward. There is still not a decision to be made by the board on final approval of this debt until later in the month in August. At that point in time, we'll bring before the board the final documentations, which includes the legal documents and the POS, the preliminary official statements, that will be then approved for the board, allowing district staff and consultants to proceed with the pricing and to receive the funds for the capital project. And between June and August, we'll be presenting to the rating agencies in order to identify and acquire a new rating on the bonds. As Wes indicated, with a AA+ rating, you're able to get very good interest rates on the bond issuances, and we'll get that reaffirmed come June and July in the next coming months. So that concludes my presentation for this evening, and I'll stop to address any questions from the board.
Thank you, Laura. Is there any questions at this time from my colleagues?
Just one question, that's okay.
Yes. Director Pennick.
Thank you, Laura, for your presentation. I didn't see, I mean, enveloped in all this 28 million in loan, the cost of the money. I understand it's 41 million to pay back on the one, but just the cost of underwriting and fees and things like that associated. Is that wrapped up in the 28, or is there an additional?
That's exactly right, Director. What we have done on the analysis of the financial costs is when I indicate total debt service payments or par amounts, that wraps up not only the funding to meet your capital projects, but also the cost of issuance and fees directed to the underwriter. So all costs are inclusive of these numbers indicated here in the slides. We're looking at about 225,000 potential estimates for cost of issuance amounts, and then the underwriter will be providing their estimated fees. As I said, they're responsive to the bids in end of May, and that ranges anywhere from $2 to $3 per 1,000 bonds. And depending on the size of the par amount, that estimated ranges in cost from anywhere from 150,000 to 200,000, and that is all incorporated in these numbers.
Okay, perfect. No, thank you for the explanation. That helps. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Director Boyd Hodgson.
Thank you, President Snella. Thank you again, Laura, for presenting this this presentation. I've seen it a couple of times now, and I learned something new every time you present it, so I appreciate it. I also wanted to thank you for adding the resolution for reimbursement. I know that I had commented a couple of times to please add that to the timeline, and I noticed that it is here tonight, so thank you. Can you just remind me, I know that we're talking about $28 million in debt issuance tonight, but what are the other million-ish dollar outstanding debts that we have? I think you mentioned a couple. Can you review those? Can you just say those again, please?
Sure, and Wes, I think you have the actual par amounts outstanding, but what we show here is the existing debt on parity with the potential 2021 new money issuance. There is the 2015 bonds that were funding bonds issued back in 2015. I believe that outstanding amount is in the range of 20 to 25 million, and Wes can correct me if I'm wrong. And the 2012 loan is actually almost completed. It matures in fiscal year 2023 with a very, very small outstanding balance. I think that amount is under 5 million. Wes, do you have the exact numbers on hand?
Yeah, I do, from the audited financial statements. So the balance at June 30th, 2020, which is our last officially audited statement, the 2008 loan had a balance of $3.4 million. The 2012 COPS had a balance of $2,266,000. And the 2015 refunding bonds had a balance of $41,390,000. But in conjunction with that, there's a bond premium of $5.5 million. So our total long-term debt is about $52.4 million.
Thank you.
And the reason I say is about is because they include the compensated absences in here for some reason. I don't know why they do that in the notes to the financials.
President Sinella?
Yes, Director Hernandez.
On the previous slide, it showed the items that were going to be taken care of with the bond. Yeah, that's 21 million. Do we have identified within this the payback to the ratepayers of the money that we have been borrowed for capital improvements and the interest we paid are going to pay?
You're referring to how that gets incorporated into the reserve policy. I think Wes identified that in the budget. We don't have any slides here today to show how that $21 million gets reimbursed to the reserve pools. Wes, did you have any other items to address on that question?
So Director Hernandez, if you're referring to how it goes into the reserves in fiscal year 2022, it will go into the capacity fund, and the capacity fund will have responsibility for that debt service. So if you look on page 117 of the draft proposed budget, it shows about $11.3 million going into the water capacity, and I believe the remaining $16.7 million goes into sewer capacity.
And so then that will end any of this discussion we've had about subsidizing developers?
Yes, and that's one of the intentions, one of the major intentions of issuing this debt.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify for my own understanding that that's part of this whole issue. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other board member questions, comments? Okay. It looks like staff is looking for some direction with regards to obtaining proposals and contracts necessary to move forward. If there's no other staff presentation, we'll go ahead and entertain a motion on that.
So Director Snell, I actually do have just one quick summary slide, if that's okay.
Sure. Is it it's not fun and colorful like the other ones, is it?
Not really, no. It's just
Okay.
bullet pointed. So this is,
okay.
Hopefully you can see my screen on the debt issuance summary.
Mm-hmm.
So in considering the debt issuance, some of the factors that are really important to note are that we've talked about the sufficient reserve levels and days in cash. So if we don't issue debt, then our reserve levels will go to a level that's probably won't be considered sufficient, and days in cash will go down. So we'll be at a credit rating risk. So we'll be at a risk of actually being downgraded for credit purposes. And then the projected capacity shortfall by the end of fiscal year 2022, if we don't issue debt, will be at $19.1 million. And the majority of that is because of the San Marcos Interceptor. And if you remember, in fiscal year 2021, we had planned we had sort of a debt issuance plan of about $10 million to cover the cost of the Interceptor. And then also important is that the capacity fee model includes a debt issuance of $18 million at 6% over 20 years. And that was scheduled for 2023 and 24. But by going just a year earlier and issuing 28 million at 2.65%, we actually get more debt at a cheaper payment, and we save in overall interest. There's about an $800,000 savings in overall interest on those two loan comparisons. So, and then if you look at the debt service costs, and Laura actually just made this sort of even better because we can do the wrapped debt service payment to allow for when the 2015 refunding bonds decrease in 2030. So we could maintain a level overall debt service cost, but even if we were to take a level cost, debt service cost for the new money, we would have a payment of $1.3 million. And when the 2012 debt is paid off in 2024, that will decrease our debt service cost by $780,000. And then the capacity fund will also save the $300,000 a year that it's been paying to the replacement fund for interest expenses. So overall, even maintaining the level debt payment, we would have a debt service cost increase of only $290,000 a year. And then finally, if we wait, so let's say we wait till next year, and for some
Real
reason,
quick, sorry. So you said 290 per year or 290 over the?
per year. So our debt service payment would be $1.3 million. If you subtract 780,000 from that and then subtract another 300,000, you get about $292,000, I believe it is in total per year. And that's without wrapping it. So, you know, the best option, and we'll look at the structures of it, we may be able to wrap it and keep it at an even level. So then finally in 2023 and 24, say we were to wait until next year to issue debt and the rates of debt went up to 4%. 4%, so 4% interest on $28 million over the same time period would mean about an $8 million increase in interest costs over the life of the loan. So these are just some reasons and justification for considering issuing debt at this time. So now that concludes our proposed debt issuance presentation.
Great. Thank you, Wes, and thank you again, Laura, for a great presentation. I'll just start off with a quick comment. I was skeptical of this issuing debt matter as when we first got started, and part of it was just I just didn't quite understand it and needed to be educated on it. I do want to thank Laura and Wes and everybody that's been involved in really making it easy to understand and to see the benefits and the overall cost. And I've kind of come full circle. I've gone from being skeptical to being supportive, and if the majority of my colleagues are agreeable, I'm certainly willing to make a motion to direct staff to move forward.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, so I didn't really give everybody a chance to chime in. So since we have a motion and a second, I'll go ahead and open it up for any further discussion if there is some. I see Director Boyd Hodgson.
Thank you, President Snella. So the amount of debt that we have outstanding makes me really uneasy, but we have 52.4 million after, assuming that we go forward with issuing this debt. That makes me really uncomfortable, but if we don't issue the debt, then we're going to go below the floor, which Wes kindly confirmed is based on best practices. So, and as Director Hernandez just clarified, Vallecitos, if we issue this debt, will no longer be borrowing from the ratepayers. So I think it is the right thing to do. I think the next step is then to look at our resolution 1450 to try to ensure that this doesn't keep happening, that we don't keep going into debt with our capacity fees, and looking at all the projects under construction and all projects in the plan check phase. There's a lot of money that we can recover if we look at 1450, which I would like to see on the agenda, and I'll reiterate that at the appropriate time in the agenda. If we look at revising that to collect our fees sooner rather than later. So I will vote in support of this tonight, even though it makes me really uneasy to have so much debt.
Thank you. Any other discussion before we take a vote? I don't think I see any. Okay, so we have a motion to accept staff's recommendation on item 2.4 made by President Sinella, and a second, if I remember correctly, Director Hernandez.
Yes.
Made the second. Okay. We'll go ahead and conduct a roll call vote. Director Hernandez,
Yes.
Director Elithart,
Yes.
Director Boyd Hodgson,
Yes.
Director Pinnock,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you again, Laura and Wes.
Thank you for your time this evening.
Thanks, Laura.
Okay,
And
let's move on. We'll go on to item 2.5, financial institution registry and authorization.
yes, I'll kickstart this. So I apologize for the length of today's meeting. These taking some time. The next three should go relatively quickly. So this one, item 2.5, is titled Financial Institution Registry and Authorization. And this just has to do with which staff members have certain financial approvals and authorizations. It's a routine administrative item, but Wes will present it very briefly. Go ahead, Wes.
Very briefly, and I am capable of that, whether you believe it or not.
Oh, yeah.
No, so this item is just brought before the board because we've recently our accounting supervisor left the district, so we have a replacement accounting supervisor, and this item allows that supervisor to be put into the LAIF authorization registry, and all this means is that he will be able to transfer money between our LAIF and our operating account on a daily basis as he does the cash flow forecast. So it's just removing Anthony Glenn and replacing him with Michael Rassam for LAIF transactions.
Thank you. Any questions? I don't see any. Is there a motion one way or the other?
Motion to adopt, Panic?
Thank you, Director Pinnock. I got a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Director Boyd Hodgson. I have a motion to adopt item 2.5 by Director Pinnock and a second by Director Boyd Hodgson, and we'll do a roll call vote. Director Pinnock.
Yes.
Director Boyd Hodgson.
Yes.
Director Elithart.
Yes.
Director Hernandez.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Motion passes unanimously. Good job, Wes.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, going on to item 2.6, the transparency certificate of excellence and district of distinction applications.
Yeah, so this item has to do with certain industry acknowledgements of Vallecitos' governance and how well the industry thinks we're doing. So Chris Robbins is going to provide the board with some background, and we'll be seeking some direction regarding the level of achievement the board would like the organization to attain. And Chris, thank you for hanging in there with us. So take it away.
Thank you, General Manager Puem. Good evening, President Sanella, board members. I'm here to talk to you about the Transparency Certificate of Excellence and the District of Distinction applications. California Special Districts Association is a not-for-profit association that was formed back in 1969 to promote good governance and improve local core services through professional development, advocacy, and other services for all independent special districts. The CSDA provides education and training, insurance, legal advice, industry-wide litigation, public relations support, legislative advocacy, capital improvement, equipment funding. But most importantly, the current information is crucial to special districts management and operational effectiveness. So the CSDA in 1999 formed the Special District Leadership Foundation, which is a 501c3. And that was formed to provide recognition and certification opportunities to special district officials and to employees to enhance service to the public. It's dedicated to excellence in local government, and its efforts are supported through CSDA, the Special District Risk Management Authority, and then they also have some public donations and fundraising that they do. Special District Leadership Foundation designed and implemented these programs: the Transparency Certificate of Excellence, the District of Distinction accreditation, including upgrades to silver, gold, and platinum levels, a certificate in special district governance, and then also a district certified special district manager. So Vallecitos initially received a Transparency Certificate of Excellence back in 2014. A lot of you may have noted that we do have a specific page on our website related to transparency. And that's based on this certificate of excellence that we have. And then subsequently, the district achieved the District of Distinction in 2016, along with a renewal of the Transparency Certificate of Excellence. And then in 2018, the district renewed the Transparency Certificate, received the District of Distinction, and achieved the silver level as the majority of the board members and executive staff had completed what they require, which is Special District Leadership Academy. So according to the Special District Leadership Foundation, our Transparency Certificate and our District of Distinction silver level are due to expire on June 30th of 2021. So I've already started the renewal process for the Transparency Certificate of Excellence, and board members and the executive staff, which is General Manager Proim, will need to complete some training for the district to once again be certified as a District of Distinction. So board member training is for the most part discretionary, except for 2 trainings required by the state legislation. The mandated training is on AB 1234, which is ethics, and AB 1825, which is harassment prevention training. And these are required within 6 months of being elected and then every 2 years after. And different agencies offer these trainings, and they're typically received by board members at annual conferences. CSDA also offers both these trainings online as an on-demand webinar. Records indicate that 4 board members need to take AB 1234 training, and 2 board members need to take AB 1825 training, but they're scheduled for that in June. To get the District of Distinction, again, the district accreditation is achieved by attending those mandatory classes that I just mentioned, AB 1234 and AB 1825. But then board members also need a minimum of 6 hours of governance training for each board member and executive staff. And board and executive staff that have remained the same since the last renewal don't need to complete the training again. So once you've been trained, yeah, you're good to go. So 2 of our new board members would need to take governance training, and they're both scheduled for this, I think, next week. The silver level, I'll talk about that briefly. A majority of the board of directors would need to have completed a certificate in special district governance. That includes like 4 modules, 1 in governance foundations, 1 in setting direction and community leadership, 1 in the board's role in finance and fiscal accountability. Boy, that's one for today, right? And then module 4, board's role in human resources, and then some elective courses totaling 10 hours of continuing education. So currently 3 of our board members, which is the majority, have completed their certificate in special district governance. There's a higher level, a gold level, and at that point, the full board and the general manager would all need to meet the level that's only required by a majority of the board. And then finally, there is a platinum level, and that's achieved by being the gold level, and then the general manager being certified as a special district manager. And so I'm bringing this item to you for discussion, basically to maintain the District of Distinction silver level. All the board members need to take those required trainings in ethics and harassment, and 2 new board members would need to take the 6 hours of governance training that they're scheduled to do later this month. And then you can also talk about higher levels of accreditation in the future if you're interested. Kind of for the board to talk about. The fiscal impact costs us $250 to renew for the District of Distinction, and it's good for 3 years. And I'm open to questions or comments from the board.
Hey, Chris, thank you. Just to clarify real quick, because that was a lot of information. Do we currently meet the silver with the three board members that have gone through the leadership?
As long as, well, everybody needs to meet their minimum level, which is that harassment and ethics training.
Yep.
It has to be renewed. And so everybody's got to get those renewed. And General Manager Poem has completed his harassment and his ethics and got those over to me, and different board members have completed different things and are scheduled for different things. But at this point in time, not all 5 board members have completed those mandatory trainings.
I gotcha. Okay. So, but as far as the, I understand the mandatory, that has to be done anyways. It's state law, right?
Correct.
So that I think it's safe to assume that's going to get done. But as far as the non-mandatory training, do we meet that qualification currently for silver?
So we will get a silver once Director Pennock and Director Boyd Hodgson complete the training that they're scheduled for next week. So
okay,
good.
Cool. Okay, I'll open it up to my colleagues if they have any questions. I'll continue for a couple more thoughts on this. I've been to the leadership academy or whatever they call it, and I'll tell you, it's probably the best training that I've received since I've been on the board, Vallecitos, and I highly recommend it. And I think for me, transparency and good governance is extremely important. And I think that we as a district are very transparent, and I think we govern well. I really have no concerns with that. However, I also like to have a third party kind of take a look and check that box for us and verify that for us. And so I like the idea of trying to strive to meet these goals. I think they're good goals for our district. And I'd be supportive of definitely silver, but even gold, just to try to raise the bar a little bit and take it even to the next level. One board member's opinion.
Here's another opinion. I think that even the platinum level is a good aspirational goal, and I don't think it would take that much more. You know, at the gold level, everybody needs, all 5 board members and the general manager need to complete the required training. But the only thing additional at the platinum level is the general manager being certified, and I don't think that's too much to ask of our general manager. So I think aspiring to the platinum level is a good aspirational goal.
Okay, thank you, Director Althar. Director Boyd Hodgson. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. I agree with Director Elitharp. I think, you know, let's try to aim high. And I think what would be really helpful for me as a new member is to have a checklist saying, here's what you need to complete, a personalized checklist so that I could make sure that I am on top of it and completing everything in the time that is required. And I appreciate that that's a bit of kind of a self-indulgent ask, but I think I really need something like that because I wasn't following all of the different things that I have to have in place that you mentioned for the platinum level. And I think a checklist would be super helpful.
I can certainly do that. And board members, I would be working with Diane. There's a certain amount of documentation that we have to submit, and it actually has to get scrutinized by third parties. I'm going to ask the general manager over at Olivenhain and then the president of the Chamber of Commerce to review all the documentation before it even gets submitted to Special District Leadership Foundation. But I can provide like checklists for people, certainly. So it's kind of individually for everybody. And I'm certainly up to the task of nursing everybody through this.
Customized learning plans.
So question, I mean, I agree, it'd be great, but I'm sure there's some costs associated with that. I mean, the training, is there a different cost associated by applying for a platinum level? What are the costs associated with it? Because I don't want it to be, you know, a cost problem.
Well, and I would like, the platinum level requires quite a bit of work on behalf of the general manager. In fact, he's got to get a certain amount of points before he can even submit. And then further, you know, there's exams required and so forth. It would take a significant amount of General Manager Pruitt's time to get to that certified special district manager, and it would also take him away from the job here. And there would be different costs for different classes for the general manager. The on-demand classes you can have for free. I think the governance classes have, a minor charge to them for the board members.
And Chris, just to follow up on that, because I attended, and I think a couple of the other board members did before COVID, these were typically handled at a conference type format. These were in-person trainings. And so there's there, at least back then, there was some travel costs associated with it. I know mine was in Northern California. So there was hotel and transportation and that kind of stuff. I don't know if that has now shifted to online or if it's going to go back to in-person after COVID eases. So there's going to be, if I guess my point is just to help clarify for Director Pennock and his question is that there could be some travel costs too.
Exactly.
In addition to the registration for the conference and that kind of stuff.
And I believe the conference is set up in the fall. And so I had reached out to Directors Pennock and Boyd Hodgson to get them into a class, I believe it's next week, so that we could meet that requirement of getting their 6 hours in before our accreditation expired.
Okay.
Yeah, and President Snella, I believe for that Special District Leadership Academy, it's normally like a 3-day event. You travel. I think they are tentatively planning to have one in the fall. I think it was, I want to say September. I believe it's up in Lake Tahoe area. But they are, because of COVID, they are offering alternative ways to do that virtually. I think it wouldn't be as easy to kind of one-stop shop it, but you'd have to cobble together a bunch of different virtual sessions.
Okay. And I'm supportive of the platinum level 2 and going for that. I don't know enough. I don't know a lot about what that requirement is going to be on you, General Manager Pruitt. So I'll defer to you. I'm not at the point. I think it's a great goal, but I don't want to put 10 hours a week of a new workload on you if that's what we're talking about, and unless you are ready and willing.
I'm willing to do it, and once we get that AGM on board, it'll make it that much easier on me. So
I didn't hear that. I guess that position did come up during the budget conversation, didn't it? It went from 107.75 to 108.75. So we're getting a good deal on that person that's only 0.75. So, okay. So it sounds like there was consensus for we're going to aim high, we're going to go platinum, and see what we can do. Everybody in agreement? Anybody in disagreement? Cool. Great goal. And do you need a vote on that, or?
I don't believe there's any action really required. No.
Okay.
We got the direction we need. And Chris, thanks for hanging in there. I know it was a long night to just be standing by in the wings.
Yeah, and Chris, and thanks for getting the information and presenting it to us. Okay, moving on to 2.7. Anybody have interest in serving on the Aqua Region 10 Governing Board? And I don't know if you want to give any background on that, Glenn, or I see Director Hernandez jumped up.
Yeah, I don't think it needs background. You know the gig. They're looking for people that are interested. If you're interested, you have to submit a nomination form, kind of an application, along with a resolution of support from your agency. So if anybody's interested tonight, we will come back at the next board meeting on June 2nd with a resolution for the board to support that nominee, and then we'll submit the packet to Aqua. And just because you submit doesn't mean you'll necessarily be on the ballot. They have a nominating committee that looks at all the applicants. They narrow it down to who they feel are the best applicants. They put together a slate, and then they put out a ballot for the agencies to vote on. So all I'm looking for tonight is if anybody's interested, we'll come back with a resolution on the June 2nd agenda.
Okay. I'm not interested, but I see Director Hernandez has his hand up.
Yes, I am interested. I did try to, I did apply for the Aqua board membership that was not approved. So the Region 10 would be a nice alternative.
Okay, is there anybody else that has interest?
Hey, Glenn, I just want to note that I think I saw Miss Gail Martin's hand go up for a second, but I didn't want to miss that.
Oh, you know what? It did. Okay.
I didn't see it.
We'll definitely give Gail Martin a chance to speak here as soon as we wrap this. I think we're about ready to wrap this up. I didn't see a lot of interest other than from Director Hernandez. And so, does he need anything from us, Glenn, or is it just good luck?
Not right now. We'll work with Director Hernandez to help him fill out the nomination form, and staff will prepare a resolution back on June 2nd. And assuming the board adopts the resolution, that bundled packet will go together and be submitted to Aqua Region 10.
Okay, great. Good luck, Director Hernandez.
Thank you.
Okay, so if Ms. Martin can hear us, she's certainly welcome to speak, and we apologize for missing your hand there. So feel free to speak on any of the items that you wanted to speak on.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, yes, very good. I just was curious, when does this certificate of transparency expire?
The current one?
Yes.
Or
Yeah, so I believe it's in the end of June 30th of this year. So we have some work to do to get that. And I believe it's for a couple of years. Every couple of years, you have to renew the certificate of transparency.
I think it's a wonderful thing for you guys to go for the ultimate level. Thank you for your effort.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes our action items. And so we'll move on to general manager report.
All right, I'll try to be brief. There's at least one I really have to cover. So at the June 2nd board meeting, the board will be conducting a public hearing to consider the adoption of the district's 2020 Urban Water Management Plan. The plan is a state requirement, and the purpose of the plan is to demonstrate that the district has adequate water supplies over the next 20-year horizon. The plan is required every 5 years. We have to do it. And in general, the plan estimates the water demands over the next 20 years in 5-year increments and identifies the sources of water that will meet those supplies. In addition to adopting the 2020 Urban Water Management Plan, the board will also be asked to approve an amendment to the 2015 plan, and that was a state requirement. The public hearing has already been noticed, so it's been put in the paper targeting the June 2nd meeting date. So we really don't have the flexibility with the meeting advanced meeting notice requirement. So I just wanted to let the board know. We've let the public know. The draft document has been on the website for quite some time. So June 2nd, we will host the public hearing. Just as a quick reminder, staff will be bringing the FY22 budget to the June 2nd meeting for adoption. And I was going to provide an update on the pavement condition on San Marcos Boulevard, but that was covered under the item previously. So that's all I have to report tonight.
Okay, thank you, General Manager. Legal counsel.
Just a quick update relative to COVID, and the emerging issues, the rapidly changing environment, I guess is the way to put it. Cal OSHA is expected to issue its workplace regulations tomorrow. As you all know, last week CDC issued its changes. I guess as this is evolving, we've got the June 15th looming lift date for all masks, etc. We're working with GM Prum to see what impact these changes may have on the formats for meetings, etc. Whether the Brown Act exception that we've been operating under will continue, or whether there will be other type requirements for virtual public meeting access, etc. But it's kind of a moving target at this point, but we're continuing to work with GM Prum on those issues.
So President Zanella, if I may add on to that, and thank you, Mr. Gilpin, for bringing that up. I probably should have said something. I'm also going to plan on bringing an item on June 2nd to engage the board in a discussion about reconvening in a public setting for our meetings to kind of gauge the board's temperature on the issue, their willingness, and hopefully by then we'll have some updated guidance from Cal OSHA. So I'll put an item on the June 2nd agenda, and that may help guide when we get back together in public.
Thank you. I was going to ask that for future agenda items, so now we don't have to. Okay, thank you, Jim Gilpin. Moving on to the Water Authority.
Thank you, President Snella. The May regular board meeting of the County Water Authority is next Thursday, May 27th. I don't have anything else to report other than that.
Thank you. Director Hernandez, did the Capital Improvement Committee meet?
Yes, we met this morning. We went over capital improvement projects. We added a as-needed general contractor and a draft project design award. It was very brief and all went smoothly.
Okay. And last week, the Encina Policy and Finance Committee met, and really only had one item. It was just a committee meeting, so no final decisions were made. But essentially, what they were discussing is so Encina basically provides 85% of its own energy, and they get 15% of it from SDG&E. And there's this movement in North County, in particular, to move away from SDG&E to an organization called the Clean Energy Alliance. And I guess Carlsbad and Encinitas are kind of going that way. And it's just like the name of it, it's focused on clean energy and reusable energy sources. And the committee, after some discussion, and I asked probably the most questions during the meeting because I just hadn't heard of this group before. Everybody else seemed really comfortable with it. I just wanted to have a little bit more background before we, switch over from SDG&E to a new energy provider. I just wanted to make sure that they were legitimate and going to be around and be able to meet our needs. And they're promising, 100% renewable energy source for our remaining 15% and at less cost. So all of the committee members seemed like they were comfortable with it and favorable. And then it certainly went on to go to the full board here next week. If everything I've heard so far in the committee adds up, I'm probably going to be supportive of it as well. But between now and the full board meeting, when we have to make a final decision, I do want to do a little bit more homework and learn a little bit more about this Clean Energy Alliance, and then we'll go from there. But I like the idea of finding a more renewable energy source. So it's interesting. And then with that, any standing committees meet. The Finance Committee did not meet since our last time we got together. Any others?
Yeah, the Engineering and Equipment Committee met May 10th. Minutes are not in tonight's board package. They'll probably be in the next board meeting package. But the items for discussion, proposed change order for the San Marcos Interceptor Phase 2 project, which we heard and acted on tonight. The Las Posas Waterline Replacement Project update, an overview of VWD's Geographic Information System, a discussion on the Sunrise Oryx Development Project, which is it's a parcel over near Barham Drive and Mission Road, right next to Escondido. And then finally, the Urban Water Management Plan discussion or update. So that's it.
Great. Any other committees? Okay, super. Thank you. 3.6 directors reports on conferences, seminars attended. Anybody would like to report anything out? Director Hernandez.
Yes, I attended the Aqua Conference, which was a debacle. We couldn't get on the first day, so they pushed the first day to the second day, and then the second day to Friday. That was the bad news. The good news was that everything was on tape, so you could go back and hear it again at whatever. The big two items that I took away, they really talked about fire preparedness and the loss of generators. I know we're well ahead of that, but my conspiracy letters contained that if we ever have an EMP event, we're all going to be hurting. So I don't know what we could do to prevent that. And then the second one was drought. Boy, they beat the drum on the drought. And we are very fortunate down in our San Diego County for the work we've done in the past decade that we're going to be good for at least a couple of years. So some people up north are wringing their hands that they didn't approve those storage facilities, and now they have no water at all. So be careful what you wish for.
Okay, anybody else have any report outs on this item? Okay, perfect. We'll go on to other business. There is none. And then any director's comments or future agenda items. Director Boyd Hodgson.
Thank you, President Snell. I have 2 items that I'd like to see on an upcoming agenda.
Okay. Oh, did we lose you? Director Boyd Hodgson is frozen for me. Can anybody else hear her?
No. Nope.
Director Boyd Hodgson, if you can hear us, you're frozen. Might be an internet connectivity matter.
You may need to drop off and come back in.
Hey, Glenn, you're on mute.
Yeah, if you can hear us, Director Boyd Hodgson, you may want to drop off and reconnect because your connection's frozen.
Another good reason to get back to in-person meetings.
Yeah.
Amen. Because as long as this meeting was, they'd have dinner for us.
Not in the budget.
I don't remember ever getting dinner at a board meeting.
No. Although
Okay.
this could be one of our longest.
I think back in the day we used to have a couple of long ones, but this is top 3 or 4 for sure.
Right now, I'd compromise for Director Hernandez bowl of nuts.
I forgot about that bowl of nuts. Yeah, I would have moved on to the second Diet Pepsi. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I don't see her reconnecting. I know one of the items she had talked about was to revisit Resolution 1450, which I believe is the resolution where we deferred the collection of cap fees to occupancy. So I jotted that note down and I'm prepared to bring that forward. I don't know if the board, if there's an urgency, if we want to do it on, I think June 2nd may be a busy meeting with the urban water management plan, public hearing and the budget adoption and a few other items, but it's whatever the board desires.
Yeah, I like the idea of revisiting our policies, and so I think that's a good idea. It does sound like June 2nd is kind of a pretty packed meeting, so maybe the meeting after, if Director Boyd Hodgson is amenable.
Yep.
Why don't we give Director Boyd Hodgson 2 more minutes and see if we hear from her, and if we don't, then we'll go ahead and continue the meeting, and I'll just direct the general manager to reach out to her offline and get the items that she wanted for a future for a future meeting, and perhaps you could just share that out with the board at that time if that's appropriate.
Yeah, that's fine. I could do that and maybe meet with you specifically, President Sinella, to set the agenda for when they'll be placed.
Sure.
Jonathan, any thoughts?
No, I haven't heard from her yet either. No calls, no emails yet either.
Okay, thank you.
I think over the last 14, 15 months since we've been doing this with COVID, I've actually been surprised that we've had so few technical related issues. We've had a couple, which is understandable and, quite frankly expected. But I think we've had a pretty good run. And I know that the city of San Marcos and the county of San Diego are transitioning back into in-person meetings. So it might be a good time to think about that.
I think Jonathan and his team have done an outstanding job. I mean, it's been
They have.
a very difficult task for IT departments, not just at Vallecitos, but in all the public agencies. And Jonathan and his team have really knocked it out of the park.
Yes, they have. Well, it's 8:20. I think we tried, and so I apologize, Director Boyd Hodgson, if you end up seeing this, that we didn't get to hear your two items, but we definitely will seriously consider and most likely support anything that you'd like to bring up in the future. So just reach out to General Manager Prum and let them know what you'd like to bring forth. And with that, we'll move into, I believe, adjournment. Yep, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the.
Sorry, one of the attendees has their hand up again.
Oh, yes, Miss Martin.
Go ahead,
Yes,
Ms. Martin.
can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I really want to thank the entire board and all the staff for their hard work and their long hours. And I agree with Director Hernandez that it would be really great to get back together so that we're together. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And again, thank you to all of our staff and my colleagues and everybody who attended from the public. Good meeting and good night.